Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Mast, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Season 10 slash Year 10 patch notes, which I just watched the entire thing. It took like 3 hours. Giant patch, right? It's an entire new season. We have a new god. So we're going to go through everything. We're going to talk about everything. I actually got to see it all live. So any sort of info on like visuals of the new map, anything like visuals of Surtr and getting a feel for all that, I got it. I got footage of it so I can put it up where it's relevant. So for the new map and for Surtr, there will be footage in this video that I'll edit in later after I've recorded this, where we'll take a look at some of the parts of the map, kind of get a feel for it. I'm assuming there will probably be some visuals in the patch notes that I can look at too. And then for Surtr, of course, I'll get footage of the actual kit to show you guys when we go over that. So get this thing out of here. Yeah, so entire update notes. We're going to start with Surtr, which should be pretty perfect. Honestly, kind of hard to tell how Surtr is going to do. He seems really weird. He's a warrior. He's going to be very different type of warrior than anyone we've really seen. So we'll get into things. It was also a little bit, they kind of didn't really flesh out everything. They kind of showed it and they didn't talk about it that much. So some of these things I might literally learn stuff as I'm already taking a peek and being like, oh, I didn't even realize it did this. So we'll kind of try and figure things out here a little bit. Also worth noting in advance before we get into the things, PTS is supposed to be live today. I'm gonna upload the same day. I always do patch notes I think I always do patch notes same day. So I don't know if PTS will be up when the video goes up, but PTS at some point should be up, and I'm looking forward to diving into that, and hopefully we can get some pretty cool season 10 footage really soon. So Surtr passive, for anyone who doesn't know, Surtr is the fire giant. Fire giant is getting replaced with a new sort of big fire giant monster that's going to have very similar abilities, have similar health, basically be a similar fire giant on the new map. And Surtr, who was the character that was the fire giant, is turning into a god who's going to be a warrior. And he's not going to be anywhere near as big as the fire giant. He's going to be much more normal size for Smite. So his passive Obsidian Flesh, when he loses health, part of his flesh will chunk off of him onto the ground in the nearby area, and when he picks those up, he can gain health over time and protections, and enemies can destroy them by walking into them. So kind of a Manicore Spike type of thing. It's going to just be something in the area. It'll kind of chunk off. I think it goes like 10, 20 units, something like that. If the enemy walks to it before Surtr does, then the enemy can destroy it and keep him from healing. He gets 1% heal per tick, and then 10 plus 1 prots per level. And the health that he has to lose is 15%. And that doesn't have to be in one chunk, at least as far as I'm aware. It's just in general 15% of his total HP. So we're getting 3% heal, I believe, total. It's a little bit hard to tell for sure with the way that they word it. I believe when I was seeing it in the patch notes, it looked like he got 3 healing ticks. So it should be a heal per second, 3 times, which isn't a ton. This would be 3% total. So basically every 20-ish, or not every 20-ish, every 15% health that he's losing, he gets 20% of that back by picking those up. If he picks them up, which he has to make an effort to do, but you're also getting those protections. You're getting 10, up to even 30 protections of both types. So that's something that he gets to, which can be pretty good. So interesting type of passive to think about. Definitely something that actually will have a direct impact on how you play him, which is cool. I always love when passives are like that. His one, this is going to be one I have to like actually read through this because they did not explain very much about it at all. So we'll have visuals for it, which will help. But he sets his sword ablaze, gaining haste. His next basic attack deals bonus magic damage, igniting the target, causing them to take damage over time, and spawning a fiery imp, which is kind of like a Nene Kappa type of little NPC type thing. Abilities bonus damage increases per stack, max of 200 when an enemy dies while the burning effect is active. Of course, those 200 are going to almost entirely come from jungle minion kills and regular lane minion kills, and very little bit of it is going to come from gods, because believe it or not, you probably don't kill 200 gods in your average game. So damage per tick, 10 to 70 plus 10% power every second for 3 seconds, which means up to 210 plus 30%. The bonus damage is 30 plus 3 per stack. Ooh. Well, hang on. I didn't know it got wild. That's actually crazy, man. Okay, so eventually this goes from 30 bonus damage of magic damage to 630. If you hypothetically get all this. This should take a ton of work. I doubt you would realistically come very close. Yeah, I'm assuming this would be pretty difficult to stack, because I think like it'd be similar to Soul Eater, but you need last hits. I guess not last hits, but like hits that are affected. And then that's all going to come from just the one. So I'm assuming it's really hard to get all those. But hypothetically, if you can, it gets crazy, is what I'm getting from this. The imp damage is 30 at max rank plus 10% of your physical power. That's going to be pretty normal kind of minion lock-on type auto attack at melee range. So it's not going to be anything crazy, but it's a decent amount. So again, really similar to Nene Kappa. 50 health plus 50 per rank. So up to not 250, up to 300 at max rank for the minions or the imp's health. Lasts for 10 seconds. Cooldown goes down as you level it. Very hard to say how good this ability is. You're getting haste, you're getting damage, which is okay damage, but it's not crazy damage. But then the bonus damage gets potentially wild as you level it. Hard to say how good the imp is going to be. Really, really big kind of just like mess of an ability where you're doing all sorts of different stuff. Really hard to say if it's going to be good, if it's going to be bad, if it's going to be crazy. We'll just have to see. And it'll probably get balanced quite a bit. So really interesting idea, though. It's very, very different from anything else we have, like not even very close. I mean, the imp is kind of like Nene Kappa, but that's where it stops. It's just that the imp is similar. So cool ability, interesting ability. Kind of weird for it to be on a warrior, though. I mean, it's sort of like out of all the classes, it makes sense, but it doesn't really seem like a warrior ability that we'd currently have in Smite, and it really does seem like something new, which is cool. And in general, his kit feels pretty new. I think every single ability feels pretty different. So moving on to the 2, Surtr Giant's Grasp. He pulls the closest target to him, either a lane minion, which has to be an enemy minion, one of his imps, or a magma rock if neither are in range. Basically, the way this works is a 2-part ability. You kind of have a circle range around you with a cone that you're trying to land, where you're either using one of their minions, you're using an imp in the area, or if you don't have one, it'll just pick up a rock and then chucking it forward in a line, doing damage and stunning. If you pick up a minion, either the imp or an enemy minion, you get a bigger AoE. So you get some extra value. If you don't, you just get the rock. So there's potential upside to playing around that. You don't need to play around that. Obviously, normally it's way easier to just pick up rock because it's not like there's rocks on the map. It's just, if there's nothing there, that's what you get instead. So you miss out on this. All of this right here, you're missing out on if you don't use an imp or a rock, but you still get a lot of value overall. This ability is really good. 310 power in a projectile, or 310 damage plus 70% power. Really good. This is like assassin level scaling. This is super similar to Kleena 2. And then stun duration 1.2 seconds. So really high potential ability right here. And if you can do it with the minion, this is going to be crazy. This is going to be 460 plus 100% plus 1.2 seconds done. Plus it hits an area so you can clear wave with it a bit. Stuff like that. It does get stopped by a first target hit. We didn't get to see it with minions in the patch notes, but I believe similar to Kleena 2, I think very similar to Kleena 2. Both projectiles, both the AoE and the just like kind of original core projectile, I think all get blocked by minions, not just gods. So do keep that in mind. Minion blocks, I'm pretty sure, are going to be really important. Don't know for sure yet, though. So this ability is pretty crazy. I'm assuming, based on what I've seen so far, it seems like we're probably going to be maxing this normally on Surtr. I don't think the 3 looked like it was worth leveling, but I haven't seen the actual numbers for it. But we'll have to see. Maybe not. This is definitely seems like the most reliable, just straight up do damage forehead ability that I've seen on him. So let's move on to the 3, Ember Walk. This is another one similar to the one where I gotta actually process everything and I gotta read through it with you guys. Creates a ring of embers around him, providing a movement speed buff that increases for hitting enemies while the ability is active. Ring deals damage and slows enemies once as it expands, or when fully formed, and again when it contracts. While formed, the outer ring deals continuous damage to enemies inside, and the ring also picks up obsidian flesh fragments. That's pretty cool. I don't know if they talked about that in the patch notes. I didn't actually catch that it'll pick up as passive for him. So basically the way that works is you have an expansion where it does damage, kind of gets to its full size, starts the slow, starts the move speed, and then it stays there, and it stays at a very weird space. So Surtr has a little bit extra auto range. I think I wasn't paying complete attention when they say this. I think it's the 16 units that you get out of spear autos. I could be wrong. It looked like it was spear auto range. So a little bit extra range than normal melee characters. And this ring hovers right around that 16 unit area. So anybody inside of the ring does not take damage. It's like the eye of a tornado. You're inside the kind of fury of the ability. You're not actually taking any sort of effect from it. And then when you get to that ring, that's when you're taking the damage. So the expansion and the contraction still does the damage, does the slow, gives the move speed buff. But while it's casting, while you're in that kind of just fully formed ring, then you want to try and keep them in the ring. And then hypothetically, you want to be auto attacking while they're in that ring, which means you kind of have them on this little inside edge of the ring, which is really difficult to manage. That's going to be ridiculously hard to manage. So like the person showing off the ability, Like you can see the miss autos trying to line up actual stationary bots. So there's going to be a lot of potential mechanical upside to this ability. If you can keep that perfect positioning, you're going to get way more value out of it. And I'm assuming the haste from the one is going to come in really clutch here, where you can use that haste to just perfectly position yourself with somebody and balance them on the edge of the ring while auto attacking, while boosting your speed, slowing them, doing damage, all sorts of stuff. That's going to be really, really high potential. So damage. 45 to 125 plus 20% scaling, not a ton. I believe this is going to be on the way out and on the way in. So it's going to be like kind of an expanding wave and a contracting wave at the end of the ability. So not a ton. That's assuming that they're in that the entire time and they're not just jumping out or something beforehand. That's going to be 250 total plus 40% scaling. And then you have this bonus damage tick that is going to continue to proc when they're actually in that fully formed ring, if you can keep them in it. So I don't know. Does it say how often that procs? I'm guessing this is every half second. This seems like one of those abilities that Hi-Rez would normally code every half second. I'm not totally sure if that's the 4 seconds. I don't think that would entirely be 4 seconds when it's fully formed. It should be close though. So hypothetically, we're maybe looking at like 240, probably not quite that much, but like maybe 240 bonus damage if you keep somebody perfectly balanced in that outer ring the entire time with 40% scaling, which would bring all of this to like 490 plus 80% scaling. I think hypothetically, it's probably a little bit less, and it'd be really hard to do all that. So it should be an ability capable of doing a ton of damage, but there's a lot that goes into getting all that damage off. And then we have the move speed buff, 10% plus 5% per enemy hit, max of 4 stacks. That's up to 30% move speed buff. And then a move speed debuff, which is this actually what it is? So I think this is, unless they're just for some reason wording it weird as hell, I'm assuming this is actually a move speed debuff, which makes it like the Suku passive auto, where it's actually reducing move speed rather than slowing, which I didn't realize that's what it did. I thought it was just a slow. So 20%, that makes it a little different. 15-second cooldown duration of 4 seconds. I don't know if it goes on cooldown just at the end of the ability or what. So yeah, pretty interesting ability. This will be, I think, the big one for Surtr. This will be the big one to play around and get really comfortable with when you're playing him. I think the one is fairly simple. A lot of it's going to be min-maxing lane mechanics, which will be pretty weird. I think you're almost going to be getting some like League of Legends last hitting big minion type stuff with the one, which is very much not a thing we have much of in Smite, trying to very tactically time some last hits and stuff like that. The 2 doesn't seem that crazy, like it's a strong ability, but it's not going to feel super different. The 3 is really going to feel pretty different and have very huge upside if you play with it well, which will be interesting. And moving on to the ultimate, this ability is going to do some stuff. This ability, you're basically taking off into the air and then falling down is a giant meteor where you are immune to damage, you're untargetable, you're up in the air, and you're kind of picking a spot to land a little bit. So it's, I believe, coded similar to Yuhuang 3. So it's not like a Rat Ult or a Thor Ult where you're quickly bouncing across half the map. You're going basically normal move speed as far as I can tell, and then having a delay between going up into the air and landing, and you're just kind of positioning yourself in the best spot that you can. So when you're coming down, the actual meteor landing, the landing of yourself, is going to do 210 to 510 base plus 60% scaling, and it's going to knock up enemies on the ground where it hits. And then you have these meteorites that branch off before you land that are going to kind of lock onto gods a little bit in the area, but not entirely. So I think if this is well positioned, if you're doing this in the middle of a team fight, I think basically every meteorite should be really well positioned. If you're trying to catch up to people, if you're trying to catch up to a team fight or something like that, then these meteorites might not end up impacting it much. They might just kind of go on the ground near where you took off. So that one will have to feel out in game quite a bit because it was hard to tell with the presentation, since it's not like live PvP and they just got stationary bots. But that's got some crazy potential upside. I don't think it says how many there are, but I believe there were 5. So that means this is hypothetically capable on its own of doing 750 plus 75% scaling, which would be crazy. Not on one person. I don't think it like locks them all on one person. It looked like it spread them out a decent amount. But if you had a big team fight and people were actually like clumped enough, then you might actually land every single one on a different person. And there's got a little bit longer of a cooldown than normal for the ultimate. So yeah, that should do it for Surtr. He's going to be a very different type of warrior because his ultimate is sort of a banish where he's not taking damage even though he's a warrior, but then he's going in really hard, really aggro as you normally would with a warrior. So that's going to feel kind of different. 3 and the 1 feel very Gilgamesh-esque, where he's really trying to get in there with his auto attacks, be aggressive frontline, a little bit like Osiris, a little bit like Bellona, and then kind of contradicting that, we've got his 2, which is a projectile stun with some decent damage. So he's going to have a pretty different playstyle than other people, where he's got some similarities, but he doesn't really feel like somebody that's already in the game. He's going to end up having a pretty different impact overall, I think, which will be really cool to see how that plays out. So moving on from that, I'm going to have to kind of pick my way through this. We're not going to go over the skins. There's a huge Magic the Gathering, I don't remember what they call it, collaboration basically with Smite. So there's a bunch of Magic skins coming in. There are some Surtr skins coming in. A lot of the skins that I got to catch on the patch notes were really, really cool, but we're not going to go over those because it's just not normally my goal with patch notes. And I'm not going to show video of them. So if you guys want to see them, go look at the patch notes for yourselves or go check them out on the PTS because the PTS should be up at some point today. Let's see, stuff about the event for Magic the Gathering. Should be able to pass all this. Yeah, I haven't actually looked at the actual patch notes. I just watched the entire patch notes. So it's going to be a little bit of a different presentation. Some bug fixes, not going to worry about that. I'm going to try and mostly pass through this if I can as well. We'll talk about it in a second. Just trying to make sure that we're all good. Okay, some of this stuff I actually have to talk about. Okay. Yeah, before I forget it. Okay, so Year 10 Conquest. So this is going to be weird. I am going to be in between calling it Season 10 and calling it Year 10. Year 10 of Smite, or Season 10, is going to have something that they're referring to as seasons spread throughout it. So similar to how we have splits, we're going to have seasons, which we're going to have 4 of, just like seasons in real life, where we have, you know, like autumn, winter, summer, spring, all that sort of stuff. I don't think they're going to be themed the exact same way. I do think spring is going to be similar. I don't know if the others are going to be similar. But with those seasons, they are planning to change the map. And it's really hard to tell so far because they're not really showing it. I mean, I'm assuming it's not even entirely designed yet, how it's going to affect the map. So I don't know if it's going to be some more subtle stuff like when they added the obelisk, or if it's going to be some more stuff kind of like the like winter. God, what were the events that we had? Those events where we had like the Invis camp and the kind of like bramble walls. I don't know if it'll just be that simple, if it'll be a lot more. I don't know if they're literally going to change the layout of the map. It's really hard to say so far. But they are talking about actually changing map pathing with each season, and general map objectives with each season. And potentially it sounded like a decent amount, given they'd be tied into objectives, but like jungle camps and stuff as well. So hard to say too much, potentially very cool. We'll have to see how much they deliver with that when we get to it. That'll obviously be like 3 months from now would be the next season. So yeah, I'm trying to think, do we really need to talk about this stuff? This is basically, there is a whole new map. We're going to kind of get into that as we get to it. But there's a very new map. It's a little bit inspired by the beta version of the map, which you guys could have played in Classic Conquest. Don't worry, it'll be much better balanced and much better made than Classic Conquest. That's a 10-year-old map. It's just somewhat inspired by it. So we're getting a much wider map. We are getting some inspiration from Season 2, which as an old player was just the best Smite has been. Straight up, like balance-wise for gods, not the best. Balance-wise for team fights and team play, oh my god, the game was incredible in Season 2. It was so much fun. So they're getting some more objectives inspired by the balancing back then, which should be really good for not even just competitive play, but just general Smite. It should make it more fun to play, which will be cool. And then also just taking inspiration from our current Smite of Season 8 and Season 9. So, yeah, we can skip past these, I think. We can skip past Surtr. I guess we can talk... there's going to be a new Fire Giant. I kind of already touched on that. It takes less damage from crit. It has a little more health scaling, so it'll be stronger as the game goes on and harder to kill by actually a decent amount, potentially. But we can mostly skip past that. So, Pyromancer now has a new reward. I believe it does not actually have the Pyromancer buff, but I could be wrong. It doesn't even say here. So what it gives you is a consumable very similar to Baba Yaga's 2, the brew that you put in your consumable slot. You get this in a consumable slot for one person, and it is a delayed bomb that you get when you kill the objective, whichever team, I'm assuming the other team that doesn't kill it can't pick it up. I could be wrong. I'm assuming you have to last hit it. And then one of your teammates can pick it up, you can pick it up, and you can throw it down with a pretty decent range. I don't know how long it takes to blow up. It looked like probably like 2 seconds, maybe not even that. And probably similarly sized to Baba 2 as well, where it's not huge, but it's got a decent amount of AoE. And you can either do tower damage with it, or you can do damage to gods with it, or some sort of in between, where it's doing 1,000 true damage to minions/structures, 300 damage to gods, and it applies a knockback. And I don't remember if we got to see the knockback in the patch notes. so I don't know how crazy strong this is. But basically, it's either something that you're trying to use to siege objectives or to have a little extra something in the next team fight and just kind of have a bonus ability that somebody's chucking in there. So an interesting idea. The big thing that I'm not sure about, I don't know if Pyromancer still does its normal Pyromancer thing, or if this is just on, like if this is on top of the normal Pyro buff, or if it's replacing the normal Pyro buff. Not totally sure. This is going to talk about, I think we can mostly skip past some of this stuff. I'll try and be good about it. So there's a change to towers where we now have these bastions. And I will try and remember, I might forget because I'm not going to watch my entire recording of this patch notes. I will try and remember to plug an image of the bastions in here because I don't think we have any around here. But basically what these are, they're kind of like shields similar to totem that spawn at the edge of the tower line. For every single tower, you have two of them. You have one on the left and one on the right. And these will give the tower extra mitigation, so it's harder to siege until they're destroyed. It doesn't look like they're crazy hard to destroy. You can kill them with abilities, you can kill them with auto attacks. They are close enough to the tower line that you can melee auto them from just outside of the tower line. And basically the idea with these is if you have pressure in lane, you can break these so that you are granting you and potentially teammates gold. And then you're also weakening the tower to be able to do more damage to it. So all of towers got reduction in their base health, so that you should now be able to, once you've killed those, do more damage to the towers. But in the meantime, you have to deal with those first. So if you're on an early push in the lane, if you're on Soul, if you're on somebody super obnoxious, where you just get lane pressure and you bully the tower, you're going to have to deal with those first. But you also get the bright side of getting money for dealing with those first, and then overall having, I think, a pretty similar time to kill on the tower. So instead of looking for a new camp or a little bit of autos on the tower, you're going to be dealing with these bastions, which give you a gold reward for lane pressure. So this says the stats, 1200 HP is the big one to keep in mind, which isn't a ton. Even early game, that's like 20 autos. So yeah, should be reasonably easy to kill, but it's going to take you some slugging, right? It's not just going to be like walk up and kill this real quick. Totem is getting changed. I think for some of this stuff, I'm not going to show it all because it's just going to be so much work and it's unnecessary. But Totem is getting moved into the lane. In the lane, it's going to be, trying to think of a good way. Maybe I will show this. Hopefully I can do a good job of figuring this out after when I'm putting it together. The totem is going to be in the actual lane, similar to where a couple seasons ago we had a scorpion in the solo lane. It's kind of like that, where it's on the wall that's going to be the outer wall. It has a decent radius inside of the actual middle of the lane, where you're going to be increasing your damage if you're within its range, within its aura, where you get 10% increased damage to minions and other gods. And both teams will get this while it's up. So potentially if you're fighting within that totem threshold, you're boosting your damage, but you also might be taking more damage if they're also in it. So it's something to play around in the lane that'll be interesting to see how that pans out. And then when you kill it, I believe you get that same buff for like 10 seconds until it wears off. And then I believe you still get the normal totem buff where you're having that same buff under towers, right? Does it say exactly? I think it's referring to the old buff right here. So I believe the old totem still going to be intact, still going to work the way it did. It's just you're also having this damage aura, and you're also having this like 10-second damage reward for killing it, is I believe how all that's going to work. See, yeah, this is the decreased health to towers and phoenixes. By the way, the bastions are only, as far as I'm aware, I guess, I mean, I don't think I saw any anywhere else. They're only under the tier 1 towers. I don't think there's bastions for tier 2 towers or phoenixes or anything. Wouldn't make a ton of sense. So this is a big one. Unleashed jungle camps. Jungle camps on your side of the map, stuff that is not neutral farm, stuff that is not enemy farm, you can pull around the map, I think basically anywhere. So they can be pulled from their camp, into another camp, and you can kind of go around your jungle collecting these camps. You could collect 2, you could collect 4. At some point, if you are not fighting them, they will de-aggro. At some point, if you get too far away, they will de-aggro. So if you like dash away, that might get you out of range. If you just try and kite them forever, they should just go off on their own. But you can reproc that aggro by doing damage and by walking back in range and stuff like that. So the idea with this is it's going to be a way that you can collaborate with your teammates and that you have a little more coordinative play around your own part of the jungle. One thing that's also interesting is you can actually have towers attack the camps. I don't know how good this is going to be yet, but it might be really good in certain situations because naturally the tower will reduce the gold you're getting by a large chunk. If I remember right, it's like 80% of the gold gets lost. However, you're going to also just have tower damage early game on minions that might be a little bit hard to kill. So maybe something that you could look to do. Of course, it would be your own towers, so it's not like you have to deal with the tower damage. Yeah, I don't think there's really much more to talk about other than that. But that's going to be a huge change. We'll have to see how that plays out and how it affects it. I already desperately want to run around. I want to try and get like a custom game so badly and run around the entire jungle and see if I can kite the entire jungle and see if we can just like dumpster like 6 camps in just a minute or so and get absurd farm. Probably would not be happening in real games because that'd be a little bit wild how much other farm people are giving up for the jungler to get fed, but it could be fun. It could be cool. And you can do some weird stuff like that where you can actually potentially group stuff up, have somebody take it on their own or take it as a team and kind of split up farm in different ways, which could be really interesting. But do keep in mind, it is only your side of the jungle that you can do this to. Of course, both teams can do it, but you can't invade camps and then take their camps around the map because that'd be really troll. And you can't leash, you can't take like neutral farm around the map. That's just going to stay still for both teams in its spots. A little bit of a change to camp timers. This doesn't matter too much, but basically the idea is with unleashed camps, you are now going to leave the buff wherever it dies. So since you can take them out of the camp range, you can, whenever you kill it, it's just going to leave the buff where it is. There'll be a specific marker on the map that is the color of the buff so that people can see where it is. But then also around the same time that normally the buff would despawn, if somebody still hasn't picked it up, it just moves the buff to the actual camp on the ground and it's able to be picked up, and it shouldn't affect the camp timer, I believe, at all, or anything like that. So basically more time to pick up buffs than you had before. Oh god, there's so much stuff to talk about, man. Stacking buffs. There are new buffs that they're adding to the game. On the duo side, we have a shield/gold buff, and on the solo side, we have a cooldown buff that is going to be existing because blue buff is getting a nerf. These are going to be neutral farm. They don't look like they're particularly hard to kill. They're going to be pretty normal for a camp. The gold buff is basically going to be a support style buff where you're getting a shield and you're getting, I think it's gold per 5, right? Does it not say here? Maybe you just get extra money when you kill it. Am I missing out? Okay, I swear when they call it the gold, maybe is it only colored gold? I've seen them talk about this twice now in the season show match they had at Worlds and then in patch notes. Maybe it doesn't give you money, and I just thought it gave you money because they keep calling it the gold buff. And then on the solo side, you're going to have a neutral camp to fight over, which should be really fun for solo laners, where you're going to get cooldown. It's not a crazy amount of cooldown, at least in the beginning of the game. It's only 5%, but it's going to scale up quite a bit over time. So eventually it's going to get to 20%, which will matter a lot late game. And it doesn't last as long as normal buffs. It's only 60 seconds. So both of these should be fun to fight over. They should be interesting, and they're positioned very close to the lanes. Right now on solo side, the camp is going to be basically where Totem is in Season 9. That's where that's going to be, and then the Totem will spawn in the lane. And then similarly, where the, whatever the hell the Scepter camp is called in the duo side is going to be the gold buff now. Roaming Harpies will spawn. These seem to actually give pretty good farm based on the little bit that I've seen in them showcasing the new map. So these are going to be very easy to kill. They're going to roam around. They're just going to kind of have set paths that they go throughout the jungle on your side of the map. And yeah, they're pretty easy to kill. They're pretty good farm. I think trying to capitalize on that will be good, and getting a feel for when they spawn will be really good for min-maxing farm. These don't matter too much. Basically, there are treasure chests around the map that you will occasionally find that give 25 gold. When you kill 3 treasure chests on a side of the map, then you'll have this rogue that spawns where you can kite it around the map. It isn't too hard to kill. You get bonus gold for killing it. And then either when you open a chest or when you kill the rogue, it gives a move speed drop similar to Bracer on the ground. So if you want to kite the rogue to somewhere where that move speed is going to be more helpful, you can do that. Really way too early to bother thinking about that. There's so many other bigger changes. It's something that's there. I'm not gonna sit on it too long. So let's see. We can move past all these. Purple buff is getting changed, so it's again an ADC camp, and it's going to be a very strong ADC camp. So no more protection debuff. You still get attack speed similar to before, and you get basic attack damage similar to you did back in like Season 5 or something like that. I guess maybe as late as Season 7. So pretty strong, 12 extra damage for physicals, 15 extra damage for magicals, and then still the attack speed buff. Before I forget, important to keep in mind, no longer is there going to be an obelisk on the map. So no more trebuchets, no more scepter, and there is no more... This isn't the same thing, but it's similar. No more upgrading camps through those not neutral scorpions, but those scorpions around the fire giant area. You can no longer upgrade buffs like before. So important to keep that in mind as well. Those are getting changed out. We're going to have other objectives instead, which we've already partially covered. So yeah. Yeah, purple buff got changed. Red buff, I think, is the same. They'd said something weird about it at some point, but it looks like isn't a thing. So I got confused on this in the patch notes. It looks like it's just basically the same as before. We're going to get slightly different buff positioning in general. The green buff is moving over in towards the middle lane area. Red buff is going to stay pretty similar. It's going to have different pathing. Speed buff there's now going to be 2 of. I'm trying to think what else. I think that's mostly it other than the blue buff, which I already talked about a little bit. We're getting the cooldown removed from that. So yeah, green buff going to be similar to the red buff, but on the other side of the map. So like if red buff is on the right side, green buff will be on the left side, and it's going to be a little bit more like a mid camp where it's a little farther up on the map than red buff will be. It'll be a little lower on the map. So yeah, green buff staying, I think, literally the same. Pretty sure this is literally the same. Has new models, which actually look really cool. They're kind of like tree people or something like that. Speed buff. How does this work? I don't even know. I literally have to read this. This buff does not stack with itself. It can be refreshed in duration, though, or split with other teammates. Removed crowd control reduction from this buff and increase the base amount of move speed provided from 8% to 14%. Jungle minion kills still provide 2 extra % move speed. Okay, so this will be interesting to play around. There's 2 speed buffs, both on the bottom of the map. Basically, before, when you spawned on either side, you'd have speed buff on the left or on the right. Now, it'd be kind of like the same thing where it's on both. So according to this, you cannot pick up both. It just looks like you can pick up both and just refresh the stacking time, or not the stacking time, but the buff duration time of the speed buff, which means it's going to be kind of pointless to do both back to back. You're not getting double the speed. You are getting a boost to the overall move speed. The buff is getting stronger in general, but potentially this is something that you're either giving to a teammate or you're picking up at a tactical time so that you can continue to have a longer duration of speed buff and not run out of it soon. So probably the second speed buff is going to ideally be going to a teammate. You might do the farm yourself, but the buff might be lingering on the ground for somebody to come pick up. And that would probably be the support, if anybody. So there's that. Blue buff no longer has cooldown. You grant 4% mana healed per second. And then when you hit an enemy god, you regen 2% of your missing mana, which I believe is literally what it does now. I think they talked about it in patch notes like they changed that. I think this is literally the same as it is now, and it just got nerfed. But blue buff was OP, so I think that's okay. And then of course we still have the cooldown buff that's getting added. So jungle timers, I am not gonna bother with all of these too much. Back harpies are gonna have a way slower respawn timer. Buff camps in general seem to get a little bit of a slower timer. We're gonna have contestable camps. I don't think it's really too much worth getting into all these because it's just there's so much to think about. But it does seem to be like the theme is going back to the season 2 days, which is really good, where some of the farm is going to be a lot slower. Some of the more contestable farm is going to be a lot faster. Oracles respawn faster. Mid camps respawn faster. Yeah, I think that's basically all there really is to talk about. So that's great. That means that there's more contested farm where your early pressure means something. You're not waiting for late game. You're trying to get ahead in farm. You're trying to group up a little bit. Jungle mid fights, jungle mid support fights, stuff like that. You're going to get more value out of fighting around mid camps and oracles and those sort of things. So, oh, this is interesting. Reduced respawn timer. I didn't know this. Where the actual like pyro gold fire respawn every 4 minutes instead of 5. That's actually a pretty big change. Okay. Players respawn a little bit slower, I believe is what this means. Wait. Okay, I don't know. These are weird stats that I like barely know exist. I believe players respawn slower is what it sounded like in patch notes, but it shouldn't matter. I don't think it's going to be anything crazy. Yeah, these don't seem like anything too wild. Hand of the Gods got removed is something that's important to know. The reason it got removed, it sounded like, was a mixture of, it seemed like support players, they were saying in SPL were not a big fan of Hog. They basically they said it was a little cringe, which I think is fair. And then I think they were also getting people voicing that they were worried about how Hand of the Gods would be used with the new minion gathering that you can do, because that'd be potentially really OP. Where it's like, hey, let's all gather these buffs together, or one person gathers these buffs together and then abuse Hog on like 10 plus minions at once. Could be pretty dumb. So they took it out of the game, which is smart. Ranked is going to get reset. Some changes to borders. Don't care too much. Some different rewards, stuff like that. This is a big one. Queues are being changed so that ranked still has timed queues, but casuals will not have timed queues. And then they're also bringing back multi-queue so you can queue multiple modes at once. The idea with this change is that matchmaking will improve at the cost of having less reliable times and potentially slower times. So if you are in a queue where you would potentially be getting a bunch of people that are not remotely on the same level and it's really unbalanced, then that queue will instead delay itself and you'll just get a match pop when it feels like it's finally got a good enough match. Now, this is vague enough. It's really hard to tell if this is going to be a great thing or a terrible thing. It's going to naturally be a frustrating thing to a lot of people because you're potentially going to have, I think sometimes it'll be like a 6+ minute queue instead of having a 3-minute queue. But the bright side should be that you're at least getting a better match when that queue pops and you're way less likely to be getting F6 at 10s. Hypothetically, that's how it'll go. It's really hard to say. Naturally, as somebody that plays on the West servers, which have a lower population, I think West has like a third of the population, probably, I don't know for sure, that East Coast has, it's less likely that I will be able to get quick matches. It's more likely I'll have to wait longer. But it comes at the massive bright side is those absolute bot games that I sometimes get where it's like, oh my God, the matchmaking is garbage. Ideally, I shouldn't get those. And it's just a question of how long do I have to wait to get good games? Like how well set is it already? So very hard to tell how this is going to go. I'm sure they're going to fine tune it a lot. They've already talked about how like this might get changed pretty quickly. They're definitely going to be very open to feedback on this because it's a big change, but potentially a really good thing for SMITE. We'll just have to see how it actually feels when it comes out. Oh God, there's so much, such a big season, man. Shards are going to be an interesting thing to talk about. I'm really excited about these. I actually, at some point soon, I might talk about how I want them to do things different with these, even though this is literally not even out yet, because I think these are really cool, but I would love them to actually explore them more. But who knows, maybe we'll see them explore them more in the future. So let me gather myself. I need coffee. I need water. Oh my God. Oh, my poor throat, man. It's already been 30 minutes. It's probably going to be at the very least 30 more. All right. By the way, I'll bring it up now. PTS is supposed to come up today. Like I said, the actual official patch ideally is supposed to come out in a week from now. We'll have to see if Hi-Rez has to change that, if they have to mix things up a little bit. So shards replace the vision shard that we currently have, which, believe it or not, is where they get shard from. So the way it works right now in SMITE is you have a relic that you get at level 1, you have a shard that you get at level 1, and then at level 12 you can change that shard into a another relic. You can get a second relic. So similar to that, where we have the relic and the vision shard, you can now get a different shard and get to actually choose that instead. It'll have a 120-second cooldown. It'll have a 3-second active effect. And these shards vary quite a bit that are mostly inspired by upgraded relics. So we have the horn shard, which reduces cooldown every 0.5 seconds for 3 seconds, which means over 3 seconds, you're getting 1.5 seconds of cooldown reduction. We have the claw shard, which grants power, it grants lifesteal, and it grants ability lifesteal for physicals. This one might be a typo. I'm not sure. I think in game, when I saw this in the show match, it looked like it's a little weird. It's a little weird. I think you actually might get physical lifesteal and they're just also writing it a little bit weird, but it might actually only be ability lifesteal, where for mages, that's just lifesteal in general, and physicals, it's a little bit different. But this also might be kind of a typo in their version of all this, where there's also 20% physical lifesteal. I'm not totally sure, but this is basically a power lifesteal boost for 3 seconds. We have the wing shard, which is a movement speed boost and attack speed boost for 3 seconds. This one's kind of crazy. 15% move speed and 40% attack speed is a really big deal. Claw shard is just kind of a general boost. This one's going to be a little more extreme with the wing. Carapace is really interesting. Carapace, your next basic attack within 3 seconds, steals 20 of both prots, which means that not only are you taking them away, but you're giving them to yourself. And then that lasts for 3 seconds on its own. So yeah, I think this is, and then vision shard is the last one, right? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, not a ton of these to play around with. There's basically, if you're really normie, maybe you go with vision shard. If you're boring as hell, I'm assuming almost everybody is going to be playing with one of these 4. I've got to say, my thoughts are that horn shard will probably not tend to feel very good, because while it actually can be impactful, it's a weird one to play around. It's going to be very inconsistent in how impactful it is. It's kind of a boxing one, and you might prefer to have one of these instead for that boxing. And these are going to be a lot more immediate active impact that you can really feel. So I think even though horn shard has some potential upside, you're normally going to prefer one of these 3. And realistically, horn shard would more often be taken in kind of weird spots where it's like maybe you're a support or maybe even a solo laner and you really don't auto attack, so you don't want to use Carapace, where instead you're going to use the horn shard just because none of the others feel like they make sense. And then we have vision shard still. You can still get that if you want. So yeah, that does it for shards. I think the shards are really cool. I would love to see it if Hi-Rez is down at some point in the future, where shards actually are viable late game options too, where we're getting these more aggressive relics that are kind of more unique than some of the other relics. And you have these options where instead of actually getting a second relic, you can upgrade the shard and turn it into a second relic, if that makes sense. I think it would be very cool to be able to play around with these, where not only are you getting a different relic than you could buy before in the late game that's still good, but you can even invest in it early game to get more reward out of it. So like hypothetically, let's sink in 500, 800 gold, something like that into Wing Shard, and let's turn it into like 20% move speed, 60% attack speed, 5 or 6 seconds, something like that, where you're getting some like crazy impact out of this and you just don't even ever buy a second relic because why would you want to? Because this is already nutty. Something like that. I think it'd be cool. But obviously this is the first version of this. They don't need to go crazy with it. Oh my God, man. Oh, so much talking. My poor throat. This is kind of just some summary stuff that we can mostly skip through. Yeah, I think we can skip through literally all of this because there should be, here we go. Here's what we need. All of this stuff is gone. I'm not going to name every one. You guys can read probably. Yeah, a bunch of stuff is gone. Most of these are items that are not remotely meta, and so it's not going to be that impactful that they're gone, at least at the moment. However, some key ones to bring up are going to be Book of the Dead, Ring of Hecate, Blackthorn, Sledge. Witchblade is a big one. Witchblade's actually pretty meta for solo laners / supports a little bit. Bulwark's not too big of a deal. Shadow Steel is a very big deal. Nemean a little bit. So all of these are gone. Most of these are items that have been pretty absent from the meta for a long time, for at least half a year, if not more. But some of them are actually fairly meta and they're getting removed / potentially kind of turned into other items as we get a really big item shift this season. So going along with that, Hi-Rez is changing the way that hybrid items work so that items like Glad Shield, Berserker's Shield, a lot of those basically power and protection items are getting changed so that they are specifically providing power or specifically providing protections. And that doesn't mean that you can't have power and health. It just means that you can't have power and prots. I don't think this matters a ton. It's going to be something that might be a little bit controversial, but I think normally they're doing a good job of keeping the item identities intact. And it's just kind of a rebalance of the stats where you're getting a little bit less like, let me buy this and just kind of get everything I need. You're getting a little more specifically things you need. And that way it's going to refresh builds a little bit for specifically solo laners, where you might see Jotun's Wrath in solo a little bit, where it's not trolling, where at least in competitive, you just didn't see it before. You might see more Transcendence. You might see some different items like that where they're getting built a little bit more, rather than just going a bunch of those hybrid power prod items. Maybe. It's not going to impact it all that much. So we don't need to bother with tier 1s and tier 2s, but Stone of Binding is getting changed, where it is now going to be a little bit OP. At least I think, I can't remember, maybe I'm thinking of a different item, but you get 40 of each prot, which almost inherently is going to be really good when it's coming at this price point. We're going into Mana Core Spikes territory, where when Mana Core Spikes came out, it was too much of a stat stick. I think Stone of Binding is going to be similar, but with a more relevant passive. So we're getting 40 of each prot, 250 health, it's only 2,300 gold, and then similar to the Binding passive before it, when we hit a CC on an enemy, we're going to reduce their prots by 5 + 1 per level for 5 seconds. So up to 25 at max rank. This is going to be really solid. It's just a stat stick hybrid defense item. And by hybrid, I mean hybrid is in both prots, not as in power and prot. Going to help you do damage, going to help your team do damage. Going to be a little bit weird for supports to build if supports want to build it, because while it's aggressive, it's not something that tends to actually work that well on support type builds. You're not really getting quite as much tankiness as you might like, or quite as much utility for your team. But it is definitely a passive that is going to help your teammates as a team fight type passive a lot more than it would in solo lane fighting the enemy. So going to be a little bit of a weird item in that way, but Binding was already kind of like that. But now it's more properly buffed up to being stronger and not in that weird tier 2 slot where it doesn't tend to get bought or it's really OP. So some, again, tier 1, tier 2 reworks a little bit because this isn't going to give power anymore. And then Berserker's Shield and Glad Shield are getting switched up a bit so that they're getting tankier, but they're still basically maintaining their item identities. Key things to keep in mind right now: Glad Shield is, or Berserker Shield, I should say, is getting attack speed added back to its passive. So we're not just getting mitigation, we're also getting attack speed. Extra prot, I believe that's mostly it. I think extra HP 5 is getting added to it. So even though it is losing power, you're getting some more attack speed aggression and you're getting tankier in the meantime. Glad Shield is going through a similar thing where we're getting less power, we're getting more sustain, and they are nerfing the passive, which they're doing. This is kind of a theme through a bunch of similar items in Smite, where if you abuse the shit out of it by proccing it a bunch of times, it is no longer as strong. Similar to the way that Heartseeker works and that Soul Reaver works, where you get that passive halved on subsequent hits. You're getting the same thing for Glad Shield and for Crusher and maybe another item like that if there's another one. So Arthur is going to get a big Glad Shield nerf this patch, and some other gods like Arthur where they spam it, like a Colin is a big one. Bluestone's getting kind of a similar change, but that one's a little bit different. So yeah, it's a really good change. And then unlike Bluestone, which is getting sort of a buff / nerf, Glad Shield is straight up getting a nerf. It is just, you can't abuse it as much. It has the same passive as before, but it gets nerfed on subsequent hits, which is kind of a big deal. But that's okay, because Glad Shield was nutty. So yeah. Frostbound getting a really cool change. Frostbound, for one thing, is getting buffed. In terms of its base stats, you're getting more HP, more power. I believe right now it's like 25 power, 250 health, which sucks. And then you're also getting actually good sustain. This is really good. 3 mana a second and 4 health a second is actually kind of a big deal. The passive is getting shifted so that it's less cringe and more cool. And that's exactly how Hi-Rez put it. And it's totally not me paraphrasing. But basically the idea is, instead of being Bellona or Osiris or somebody that is just in your face, slapping the shit out of you and just slowing you for all time until they're killed or until you somehow escape, instead it is going to be much more of an Ansel, which ironically got removed, type effect, where it's immediate and then you have to wait a little bit before you get it again. So your next basic attack on an enemy god creates a 30-unit shockwave, which I think is literally basically Ansel proc, but Ansel wasn't on an auto though, where it slows move speed and attack speed by 25% for 3 seconds. So in an AoE around the person you're hitting, there's going to be that 3-second debuff that applies to them and people in the area, and occurs only once every 10 seconds. So you're not going to continue to proc it and continue to slow the shit out of them, but you're going to get one big impact slow on your next auto. Which means in lane where you're trying to bully, way less impactful. In team fights, potentially more impactful. It's going to really depend based on the context, but it's something where this is more of a universal item now, where you can get more universal value on a variety of gods. And it's less like, let me build this on Bellona and slow you for all time. But it's also getting buffed, so it's more viable in a way to build it even on gods like Bellona that might have wanted it before. It's just more consistent, more bursty, which is really good. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that feels, if it feels like it's worth building or not. Runeforge getting significantly changed, very new passive. The stats are similar on it, but now for the passive, when you successfully hard CC an enemy god, and unlike before, this can be any CC. It's not avoiding knockups and pulls and stuff. You create a symbol on the ground. They didn't show this. I don't know how big this is, where enemies take more damage by 10% for 5 seconds. One thing that I'm a little bit worried about with this patch, there's a bunch of passives like this. At least I think. Maybe I'm tripping. Maybe I made it a bigger deal. But there seem to be at least a few passives where it's like, there's a circle on the ground. The circle is going to have some sort of visual effect that we haven't seen yet. You either want to be in it or you don't want to be in it. And there's probably going to be a lot of confusion. We're going to get into a little bit of potentially like a later stage Overwatch situation where there's a bunch of colorful shit all over the map in team fights. And for one thing, you don't know which color is yours and which color is theirs, because it might be the same. I don't know. So sometimes you might fight in the circle on accident, when you should be fighting it, when you should be avoiding it on purpose, right? So there's going to be some confusion, I think, over these. I could be wrong, where Hi-Rez might be getting a little too messy visually, where it's like, oh, here's this area that's good, but is it good? Is it the enemy's area? I don't know. Which circle is this? I don't know the color. It might get really confusing and weird. So I don't know. We'll have to see how it looks in game with that stuff. Caduceus is getting reworked into a club. It's going to be very statistically similar because Caduceus had power and prop before. It's getting changed to power and health. And then the passive's just going to be the same passive. So basically, I would say this is effectively a nerf to Caduceus for the most part. But other than that, it's mostly going to be the same. This gets a little weird. So I was very hopeful going into the season. I didn't have huge expectations, but I was hoping that anti-heal would get changed and that we'd have a better healing meta, and that is not true. Anti-heal is getting more expensive, but they are adding bonus passives to these items to try and make up for that expense, and I really think it's going to get a little bit weird, because these are still items that you buy because of anti-heal, not because of these new passives. So I think Hi-Rez got very confused with this part. I'm assuming most people will agree with me that this is just adding more stuff on. They're talking about how anti-heal's a bit too much of a stat stick, but the issue with that is that they specifically make these a stat stick. This is specifically broken. If anybody has healing of any kind that is remotely significant, it can be AoE, it can be self-healing, it doesn't matter. This is broken. It is just straight up OP. 40% reduced healing is insane, especially considering these stack with each other. So you just buy them for that to begin with. Even if they just straight up buffed all these or nerfed all these to this price point and didn't buff them in any other way, they would still be OP in a large amount of the time, right? It's just crazy. So I feel like for the most part, I think this patch looks great. I think it looks fun. They're changing a lot of things. This is the one big change that stood out to me in patch notes when I was watching it live, where I was like, oh, Hi-Rez, what are we doing? What are we doing here? This can't be it. This can't be good. So that's my opinion. I might even do a full video on this soon because I think healing has gotten really fucked up in Smite over the past year or so. I think it would be great to have a discussion about how to make it better. But moving on from that, what they're doing is making anti-heal more expensive and then adding in bonus passives on top of the anti-heal. So for Divine, we are getting basically a Chain Lightning Oboe type effect, but on abilities rather than autos, where damaging an enemy on your first successful cast is going to bounce around a lightning chain that does 40 plus 20% scaling between enemies. This could be crazy. It does have a passive cooldown of 20 seconds. This could be really, really crazy. We're talking something that's kind of similar to Calamitous, but not going to be a delayed circle. Instead, it's going to be a bouncing chain lightning effect. So yeah, anti-heal still going to be bought. Now it's more expensive, but now it comes with an OP passive. It's basically the gist of Divine Ruin. So I'm kind of worried about this. I think this seems really, really strong. And I already thought Divine was realistically OP anyways. So not really personally a fan. Brawlers gets a similar treatment, but a much worse passive to it, which is nice. So Brawlers getting more expensive, still has anti-heal. But now when you kill or get an assist on an enemy god, you create one of those fields I was talking about where allies get a power boost inside of it. So it's going to be something that's weird where you're having, what was the other circle? It was like right up here, right? Rune Forge. So you CC an enemy. Maybe both teams have a Rune Forge. You got to figure out who has which circle. Then you have Brawlers. You kill an enemy, or you're near a kill on an enemy. Your team gets a power boost, but maybe their team has a Brawlers, and maybe they get a power boost, and maybe there's literally no difference in the colors, and you just have to somehow know which circle is which. So I think this could get really messy and really cluttered. We'll have to see how it is in game. In general, not a big fan of giving items this type of buff. I think abilities like Bologna ult are very cool, where you are specifically potentially placing your banner or something like that in a specific spot. Or when it's auras around you, like Amma passive, or like Talisman of Energy, where you're specifically positioning around your team. I think those are cool. But we've already seen in Smite, God, what was it? War Banner? No. Whatever the Spartan flag or whatever, the upgrade for what the hell is it called? Whatever the War Banner, war flag. Yeah, so Spartan's flag, the upgrade for war flag. We already have this type of thing in the game. It's weird to play around, where it just kind of auto procs the circle that you hypothetically fight around, and it might be good and it might be bad, and it's just kind of like extra mess in the game. I'm not really a fan of this type of thing, and it's weird to put it on anti-heal items too. Toxic Blade getting reworked a little bit, getting a nerf to the attack speed, getting a nerf to the pen, getting an increase to the cost. You're going to be able to get 60% reduced healing over a stack of 4 auto attacks, and we're getting a little bit of the Ikeball impact added to this, where you're reducing attack speed and increasing your own attack speed. So if you stack this up over 4 autos, you're getting 35% attack speed rather than this nerfed 15%, whereas before it was 30%. And then you're still getting anti-heal, and then you're potentially reducing their attack speed by 20% as well. Really weird way to go with this item, in my opinion. I really don't think you're going to see this particularly bought for brawling in lane at all, because the stats are terrible for living in lane. It's very much a I desperately need anti-heal late game type of item that you tend to pick up much more on assassins than hunters. Assassins or warriors. So very weird way to go with this. I don't think it's going to feel particularly good. I think it's going to mostly just feel like Toxic Blade, where if you really need it, you really need it, and otherwise you don't buy it. Although do keep in mind, Shadow Steel got removed. Toxic Blade is just kind of a bad item normally. So Pestilence getting kind of a cool change. I do think the way they went with Contagion and with Pestilence are actually pretty cool, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. So it's getting an increase in cost, not quite as extreme as the other anti-heal items, and we're still going to keep that Pestilence anti-heal aura, which is also still not going to stack with Contagion, even though now we're finally getting a little bit of a difference in these items, other than just them being physical and magical defense. But the way Pestilence is going to work is enemies that successfully damage you have their healing reduced by an additional 5% up to 6 times. So let's say that you're getting hit by like a Set, and Set is ulting, and Set wants to heal a stupid amount. and you already have 25% anti-heal, which is going to be a bit of a nerf. But because of that ult, he hits you a bunch really fast, and that really quickly turns into 55% anti-heal. So really, really strong, where basically tanking damage from people that are trying to heal is going to have a big impact, and they're going to heal for less. And I think the passive is cool. Again, I think anti-heal is way too strong in Smite, so I think that's going to be a little bit lame, where it's way too easy to anti-heal people to the point that they literally do not heal, which is dumb as hell. However, I think the passive concept is cool, and I just hope at some point they rebalance anti-heal in general. Contagion gets a fairly different one. Contagion's still going to have similar stats. It's still going to be more expensive with the new changes. But when you're hit by a hard CC, the enemy receives an aura that deals 40 magic damage per second to them and enemies around them within 25 units for 5 seconds. So this should be like a lock-on ticking poison, kind of matching the theme of the item, which is Contagion, where you're kind of giving them a mystical mail for 5 seconds that hurts their own teammates. So it's going to give eventually 200 magic damage to them. Of course, they'll have mitigation for this and stuff. And then also, they're going to, any enemies in the area might also take a total of 200 damage, depending on how close they are for that. So that's potentially actually pretty big impact in stuff like team fights, and even pretty big impact in lane. It'll be really interesting to see how strong this feels, especially keeping in mind this doesn't scale. This just does what it does. So if you're in lane right now, I also don't know, this does not show a passive internal cooldown. If there is not an internal cooldown, this is broken as hell. I don't think there's any way there's not. So I'm assuming it's like at least 20 seconds. We'll have to see in game. Because imagine Tyr casually just having these for life. So when he dares to hit somebody that went Contagion against him. So I'm assuming there's a cooldown that we don't get to see, but this could be pretty crazy in the early game when you need it, because you're doing a bunch of damage back, which could be really strong. So moving on, Winged Blade is now basically more of a support item, where the passive is going to affect not only you, but also allies within a pretty decent range, within 30 units. I also can't tell for sure. It had kind of sounded like maybe it continues to last. I think it's an instant thing where you're hit by a slow, anybody that happens to be near you also gets a cleanse and a speed boost. But it might even be a little bit of a temporary aura over 4 seconds. I'm not totally sure, because the aura would be more OP. Gem of ISO getting a big change similar to Frostbound. I think this is a potentially cool change. It'll be interesting to see how it feels, because right now it's garbage. It's keeping its stats, but the passive's getting reworked so that enemies will get a burst, where enemies hit by your ability will move 30% slower for 2.5 seconds, and it only occurs every 10. So instead of having to somehow try and keep that Gem of ISO applied forever, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to get a stronger slow for a longer time, but it's going to be only that once every 10 seconds. So that could be really good on a big chunk of gods. It could be good on damage mages. It could be good on support. It could be good on solo laners that are either mage or guardian. Really, really versatile item now, where it's just, is it worth building it? So I think that's really cool. I think that's a good change. And it might be triggering, because it's similar to Frostbound. It's going to be a big chunky slow that's going to hit you real hard all at once. But I think it'll end up being cool. Spectral is getting a little dumb, as if crit wasn't already nerfed hard enough by Spectral. Spectral is getting something similar to Pestilence, where when you continue to get hit, you start stacking up an aura where people take less damage from crit, including yourself. So it's a little bit more expensive now. You still take the 40% reduced bonus damage, but now when you're hit by a crit, you and allies within 55 units, which is a huge aura. That's like Sov, Gauntlet of Thebes size aura. Everybody else, including yourself, will also take 5% reduced bonus damage from crits, stacking up to 4 times and lasting 8 seconds, which is a very long time. So potentially you yourself can take as much as 60% reduced bonus damage, which means crits will do almost nothing extra, and they will basically just be autos that have nerfed themselves by building crit. And your teammates can also potentially be just getting 20% reduced bonus damage from crits, which will definitely have an impact. So of course you need to be taking crits yourself. It's not like people in the aura can take them and add to that passive. But if you are face tanking, it's going to potentially do a pretty big impact for whoever you're face tanking is damage the rest of that fight, or other people building crit if there are other people on the other team. Demon Blade is basically Wind Demon. It's getting moved to a new tree. Important thing to keep in mind is that they are no longer going to have move speed on the passive. So you're no longer getting that 10% move speed when you land a crit, but everything else is the same. The stats are all the same. They made it 100 gold cheaper, unless it's actually this right now and I don't remember. I need water, man. Oh my God. Regrowth is getting reworked into a breastplate. So it's going to have a bunch of protection instead of health. And then the passive is going to stay the same, which should make it way better. Generally speaking, pure health utility items like Regrowth don't tend to feel very good unless they just have incredible passives. And normally Regrowth doesn't have an incredible passive at the moment. So This is a way to make it a lot more viable on a character like Herc who could actually use it. Lotus Sickle is the new version of Lotus Crown. It didn't really look particularly good to me. It's got move speed, which stands out a little bit, but the stats aren't really crazy. It's 2,000 gold, which is cheap, but the stats are a little bit garbage. So 25 prot, 300 health, cooldown, move speed. Any god affected by your ability gains 10 or 15 increase to both prots. So it could be good. It's probably not going to feel too great because it still stays fairly similar to actual Lotus Crown, which wasn't very meta when it got removed. Getting a rework to Magi's in its tier 2, which is Cleric's Cloak. So removing the health, adding cooldown, and increasing the prot, which is going to make it so that assassins who build this especially are going to be less tanky from it. It's going to stand out a little bit less. Like they do get the boost to prot, but they're not going to have that giant increased chunk of health, which should be interesting. And then it's adding cooldown. So I think basically the way this is going to go is that it's going to feel a little more stable of an item where you're getting, for one thing, more stats that you would normally ideally like on the character. And you're going to get a little bit less of the, a lot of time it felt like there were very specific matchups where if you built Magi's, not only was the bubble nice, but the amount of health you got was like just enough to not get one shot by whatever you're trying to avoid. And that should happen a little bit less now. That chunk of health should be a little less extreme and it'll feel a bit tankier, but also a bit more aggressive is how it should go. A little bit of a change to Morningstar. They're switching mana or MP5 over to mana. Goes all the way up to Hi-Rez. Going to make it work a little bit better with trans, so you're getting more damage out of transcendence, and then Hydra should still have MP5 on its passive. This will be interesting. I don't remember all of these, so we'll have to go through and see what I remember. Oh, is this the wild one? Oh, maybe not. Okay. New Mage ADC ring. Pretty normal Mage ADC stats. Does have 10% cooldown though. Your next basic attack against an enemy god deals bonus magic damage equal to 8% of the target's HP. Only happens once every 10 seconds, reduced by 2 seconds for each successful basic attack. I think I missed this one in the patch notes. So potentially very strong, where if you're just spamming autos on somebody once every 5 autos, basically, you're getting this to proc again, or maybe once every like 4 autos, and doing a big chunk of damage all at once. I don't really know. It's kind of hard to say how strong it's going to feel though. Kind of a weird item to give a Mage ADC. Tablet of Destinies. This is one. Can I pull this up? Does this? I don't remember how I have this set up. Hang on. Can you guys see this? You can see this. Okay. Check this out. This is quick math right here. So we'll read the item first and then I'll do this. I haven't done this with a calculator yet. I did it in my head. Unless I'm stupid, I basically did the math and decided this item's garbage, at least in its current state. So 90 power, 150 health, 300 mana, nothing crazy stat-wise. It's kind of expensive at 2650. It's going in the slot where Book of the Dead used to be. It's not as similar to Book of the Dead, but Book of the Dead got removed and this is getting added to the same tree. So your next damaging ability grants a stack of wisdom. For each stack you have, your abilities do 0.08% of your max mana as true damage to enemy gods. You may only gain 1 stack every 2 seconds, which is still pretty fast, and can only gain stacks once per god per ability hit up to 50 stacks. The stacks are permanent. This doesn't evolve or anything. You just get up to the 50 stacks, which means you get up to more true damage every time you're landing abilities. However, 0.08 times 50 is equal... What? Oh, that's... Okay, wait. No, this is confusing me more. Wait, is this better than I think it is? Oh, this might be better than I think it is. Okay, no, I might have done the math a little wrong. Is this a typo? I could have sworn it. God, now I got to go back and look. I could have sworn that when I had done this, there might... Okay, this might be nutty. Never mind. I thought there was supposed to be another 0 here. I think when they showed this on the actual patch notes, I think there was another 0 here. Because I thought I had done the math and gotten to 0.4% of your max mana at max stacks, and this is saying 4% of your max mana at stacks, which means it does 10 times more damage with the passive, which obviously makes a difference. So, I don't know, like maybe I was tripping balls, maybe one of them has a typo and we don't know which one. We'll have to see in game. If it's this is a lot better, because what I was going to show is that when we times this by like a max mana build in Smite would be like 3,000, right? So when we times this by 3,000, wait, I did this math stupid. Okay, we're not looking at the calculator anymore. I got to do it in my head. I did the math stupid. That's not how it works. Hang on, I'll pull it back up. Okay. So we get 3,000 mana. 4% of that 3,000 would be the damage. So that's divided by, that's not the math either, divided by 25. So that'd be 120 true damage per ability, which is actually a lot. However, if it's what I thought it was when I watched the patch notes live, which would be a tenth of that, this would be 12, okay, which is garbage. So I don't know which is which. I am going to guess that it's this one and that I either just saw it wrong the first time or they just had a typo for the live patch notes. But if it's that, then that's 120 true damage per ability, which is actually going to get wild as we get into the late game and probably needs nerfs. So early game, not going to be that good. You got to stack it up. But then as you get to that point, that's like buying a second Soul Reaver that does its own thing. And we don't have the subsequent nerf like some other items do. So that's something where if you're building this on somebody that spams cooldowns pretty often, like maybe a Raijin, where you actually tend to hit people with all 4 of your abilities, or at least 3, then you're getting somewhere between 360 and 480 bonus damage per rotation of cooldowns, and that's true damage, so it's going to apply to tanks and squishies the same, and it's going to do the full amount, which is going to be crazy. So if that's actually the right number, then this is wild. But we'll have to see. Let me close this out so I don't actually bring it up. Bladed Boomerang is a new item getting added in as a crit item. This item looks really interesting. There's a character in League of Legends. I don't play League. There's a character that this item I believe is based on where you kind of have to go pick up your auto attacks to do at least either to auto in general or to do more damage. I don't know what, which I've seen a little bit because I know it's like the Tyler 1 character. That's basically all I know. It seemed like the concept for him was cool. So this item, fairly expensive, 2,600 gold, 40 power, 15% attack speed, 20% crit. Your next basic attack on an enemy god creates a deployable that when picked up provides you with 4% move speed and 10% crit chance, stacking up to 3 times and can only occur once every 2 seconds. This is not going to go straight to you. It is not going to go straight on the ground. According to them in the patch notes, it's going to land somewhere nearby that you have to pick up. So if you're a melee character, it sounded like it should auto pick up. If you're a range character using it at max range, it's probably just going to be kind of similar to the Surtr passive where it's just pretty close and you got to go scoop it up if you want to try and get the min-max. But this potentially is getting you up to 12% move speed and 50% total crit, hypothetically. It's going to take a lot of work unless you're a melee god, and that's also occurring only once every 2 seconds, which means realistically it would be up to those stats. When you're boxing, it's probably going to be kind of a weird item to calculate how worth it is in terms of bursting, because a lot of time you're just going to get 1 proc of the passive at most, or maybe 2. So going to be an interesting one. I think it's a cool concept. I don't know how good it'll actually be though. So moving on to Shadow Drinker, this is an item that looks really cool on paper, is probably not going to be that good in practice, which is tragic because it's an item that I would love if it was good in practice. But the stats, 2,300 gold, which is fairly cheap, 50 power, 10 flat pen, 7% move speed, really solid stats, kind of similar to stone cutting. And then killing an enemy god drains their shadow, causing you to enter stealth and gain 30% move speed for 3 seconds. Taking damage or acting, as in firing an auto or using an ability, is going to break the stealth. So the issue that I see happening with this is killing a god, autoing 1 more time. Oops, I broke my stealth. Super common thing to happen. You don't know exactly when you're going to last hit a lot of the time. You might accidentally break it on your own. If you have any ticking damage, if you're getting hit by archers, those abilities could hit the moment that you get that passive, and you could instantly lose the passive. As far as I know, it seems like the 30% move speed stays, which is still potentially good, kind of like a Bloodforge type aggro proc. But very often, you are probably going to lose the stealth. So that's the giant downside to this item that otherwise could make it really cool, is I think in practice it's going to feel a little clunky where you don't tend to get that stealth value and it's going to tend to get broken. Other than that, really cool. And if they rework that at some point, because assuming that works the way I think it will, then if they rework it so that it's a little less easy for that to happen, then it'll be more fun and it'll get a little crazier. So moving on, God, how many items are there? I think there are going to be a lot. Dawnbringer. I don't remember what this one is. There's some items like this that are kind of tank items that I tuned out a little bit. I kind of processed them in real time and then forgot. So 40 power, 300 health, 20% CCR, a little bit like Sledge in terms of the stats. When your ultimate is finished casting, your prots and move speed increase by 5% for each enemy god within 55 units for the next 6 seconds. So potentially middle of a team fight, you cast your ult, you have this item, you get 25% move speed, 25% prot increase for a while. So can make you kind of a tanky menace. Going to vary a lot on how useful it is based on the god that you're playing. Definitely seems like an item that Osiris would absolutely love, and a lot of other characters would not necessarily use at all. So moving on to Absolution, 60 magic prot, 250 health, 10% CCR, which are okay stats for 2250 gold. Nothing crazy, but it's pretty normal. When your ultimate ability is finished casting, you pulse out a cleansing aura within 50 units, providing all allies with CC immunity for 0.6 seconds. This effect can only occur once every 40 seconds. So the idea with this one is that you're getting something similar to a light stance Hell 2, where you're cleansing a pretty big area, and trying to get a very tactical timing of a support ultimate that then cleanses another support ultimate or similar CC for your teammates. So if you have like 2 Gebs and 1 Geb ults, and then the other Geb ults, the Geb that ults second can then cleanse the Geb ult from his teammates in the area, while CC immuning to be able to cast it to begin with. Stuff like that. Normally it's not going to be mirror match stuff, but the idea is basically Guardians can kind of counter each other's team fight initiations with this. It'll be interesting to see how practical it ends up feeling, because I think it'll be very hard to time, but it's got crazy potential where you might not have to bead a giant support ultimate, and especially something that could be really OP is if you get Ares ulted as a team and you don't want to have your teammates burn their beads, you can chuck down some sort of pretty quick cast ultimate in the area of your teammates and just cleanse an entire Ares ult on everybody there. So there's going to be some specific interactions that'll be really strong and some really high mechanical play for some of the harder ones. Abyssal Stone, this one looked really OP. This is the one that in my head was similar to the new Gem of Binding buff that we saw, where this is an absolute stat stick of an item. It's fairly cheap. It gives you 40 of each prot. You get 300 health. Again, way too similar to Mana Core Spikes, which already felt OP when it came out recently, even though the passive wasn't that good normally. So very tanky item. When you successfully apply ability damage to an enemy god, you debuff them, afflicting them with negative cooldown for 4 seconds, but can still occur every 6 seconds. So the way this works is that when an ability is on cooldown, it has the cooldown that it has. So if you afflict them with this and they are casting abilities during this 4-second duration, they will have longer cooldowns once those abilities are used until they come all the way back up. That's 20% negative cooldown. It's going to stand out a lot more on somebody that has no cooldown as well. Because if you're using an 18-second cooldown and it's 20% slower, I wasn't ready for the math with this, but I think it's 21. I guess it's a little bit, it's like 21 and a half, right? I think. So it's like you're adding like 3.5 seconds of cooldown to that ability. So situationally, this could be very impactful. Normally, the reason this item should stand out is it is a ridiculous stat stick that is going to impede enemies in the area, and that's going to be potentially strong. So I think it's going to need a little bit more of a focus on the passive, which I think is potentially cool. It's going to be annoying to play against, but I think it's potentially cool. It's going to be a general. It's kind of like Witchblade, but for cooldowns, where it's just kind of nerfing what they're doing. But I think these stats are too much. Again, similar, they're adding more and more of these mixed physical magical prot. I really don't like the idea of having so many mixed prot items in Smite. I think it ends up being too much of a just buy this item forehead because you get very tanky. So hopefully they'll end up switching that up a little bit. But Archdruid's Fury, which is a new item, 35 of each, 300 HP, a little more expensive at 2,500 gold. This one, I think, is the crazy one. This one could be ridiculous. So you gain a stack up to a max of 6 each time you take damage from enemy gods, equal to 5% of your max HP. So that's like a burst of damage that does 5% of your HP. If you take that much at once, that gives you a stack. Your next basic attack on an enemy god consumes all of these stacks and deals 30 plus 2 per level true damage, which is 70 per stack. So up to 70 times 6, which is 420, and this effect can only occur once every 15 seconds. I don't know for sure how it works. I don't know if you can build stacks in the meantime while it's on cooldown, but basically the idea is you can only apply that auto every 15 seconds. You might be able to stack up the next auto within those 15, and then the moment that cooldown's up, do it again. But this means that somebody that is trying to do some damage in a tanky position can do a 420 damage auto attack that they charge up mid-fight, or even before that. So that could get absolutely ridiculous. That's something that supports could use. It's something that warriors could use. It is something that assassins could use. Unless I am getting confused here, I believe none of these trees are now class-based, but I could be wrong. Maybe it's still only guardians. maybe that's something because at least some of these got switched so that they can be built by both classes, by multiple classes now that couldn't before. I could be tripping, and maybe this is still a guardian only item. Either way, it's going to be crazy on some people. There are going to be some people that proc it really easy and do some disgusting things, and I think it's going to need nerfs. I don't know how the hell to say this. Phalanx. I don't know. But yeah, new item, 55 prot, 150 health, 20 HP 5, 10% CCR. I really hope Hi-Rez kind of goes a little less extreme with the variety of stats they tend to have on these tank items. There's been such a big theme lately of have prot, have HP, have sustain, have CCR or CDR. 4 stats. You don't need 4 stats with an item that's got a unique passive. It's so extreme. They've been doing way too much of this lately, where it's kind of ironic that like this patch, they're like, let's have less of these hybrid stat sticks where you're getting power and prot, but let's also give a lot of these tank stat sticks where you just do all of this stuff. In general, damage items tend to do this way less, and tank items do this way more. And I play a lot of solo lane, so like it's not like I don't use these items, but I think it's lame. I don't think it's fun. So I hope they do less of this and then they make things more specific in the near future. So this one, when you're basic attacked by an enemy god, friendly minions within 40 units gain a stack up to a max of 3. These stacks increase their attack speed and their protection for 6 seconds. So, and you cannot give more than 1 stack per second. So the idea with this one is if you're in a lane where you hypothetically want to somehow try and bring Tyrannical back from the dead, and you think you can actually tank autos before the enemy god kills the minions, then you can buff your minions so that they're tankier and so that they attack more often, and you can make your minions dumpster the enemy god while you face tank them. Realistically, probably not going to feel that strong. You're probably going to either get the wave one shot, because that's how most clear works in Smite, or at least close to one shot. At least the archers get one shot. Because keep in mind, you can't just have this level 1. Like, this is a full tier 3 you have to finish. And normally by the time you finish a tier 3, people are tending to one-shot waves. So this would be more like, hypothetically, you're going against like a Bellona and you're Osiris, and you are CCing and face tanking the absolute shit out of her and getting in the way and making it harder for her to kill minions. Maybe she takes enough damage that the passive actually feels impactful. They're probably still going to delete the wave anyways, and it's going to do barely anything. It's going to be a bad item, but hypothetically, maybe it could do something, but probably not. Prophetic Cloak, this is the OP one, right? Yeah, this one's insane. So this one, when they first showed this, they kind of showed it step by step, and I was like, okay, that's an interesting idea. And then they showed the full version, and I was like, Hi-Rez, what have you done? So this item is supposed to be a competitor to Gauntlet of Thebes, a little bit like, not Shield of Regrowth, what's it called? Mail of Renewal has recently become. So Mail was a little bit more of a solo lane aggressive option where mid-team fight, you don't have to stack this item up, you just stack it up in the fight. It's aggressive, you take damage, you heal yourself, kind of a cool item. It's a way to build something like Thebes without needing to actually be Thebes in Smite, and kind of a cool, more early game focused competitor. So that was cool. Mail Renewal is great. I don't remember how often it was built at Worlds, but I specifically remember seeing Fine OK build it on Kakolin in at least one game. Prophetic Cloak is going to be like a much slower version of Gauntlet of Thebes, where you're stacking it up in a way that's kind of similar to Mail Renewal, but it's going to take longer of the game to get it stacked. Once it is stacked, it is going to be OP. It is going to be the most broken item in Smite, and I don't think it's close. I don't say this in a hype way. I say this in a sad way. It's going to be absolutely stupid how good this item is. And you can build it in any lane. You can build it in a solo lane. You don't have to be support for it. So the original stats, not that good. 25 of each prot, 2350 gold isn't too expensive. 150 health, 20% cooldown. So the tankiness is not that strong. 20% cooldown is very strong. If you want to be somebody that is normally maybe looking to go breastplate or Genji's in lane, but you think you can survive missing out on those early prots, then build this instead. You're going to get really good cooldown. You're not going to be as tanky, but it might be okay. And then over time, you will stack this up and you will win your team the game. Is that like how dumb this passive gets once it's evolved. Eventually, you'll get late game. If you can stack it up, it's going to be dumb as hell. It will be kind of hard to stack this up because you're going to have to hit both magical and physical characters. But once you evolve it, it gets really dumb. So the way it works, once every 10 seconds, when you damage an enemy god with an attack, doesn't have to be an auto attack, it can be an ability. You gain a stack of 2 prots specific to the type of damage that target deals. So if you hit a Major Guardian, you're getting 2 stacks or 2 magic protections. If you're hitting a physical god, then you're getting 2 physical protections. You can get 15 of each of these. So this is kind of a Charon's coin type thing, but it's not RNG based, which means eventually you are getting 30 extra protections of each type. You have to only do that every 10 seconds. It's going to take a lot of work to stack that up. But if you can stack it up, then you evolve it eventually, which gets ridiculous, where not only are you getting eventually these 55 prots from building all these stacks, but you evolve it and get an aura and get a passive on top of that aura. That aura is better Gauntlet of Thebes, where you get 30 increased protections of both kinds to all allies, including yourself, within 70 units, which turns this into an 85 of each type prot item, which turns it into 170 prots total. But also, little bit of a Lono's Mask thing. If you have over 400 total prots, not just from items, just total, so 200 of each, you gain 10% mitigation. If you have 600 total prots, so 300 of each, you gain 10% on top. So hypothetically, even if it's not an aura, even if it's just for you, you can give yourself 85 of each prot, 150 health, 20% cooldown, and 20% damage mitigation on a single item that is not a starter upgrade. Which is even more OP than the original Gauntlet of Thebes crazy release that gets memed on from like season 3. I don't remember when the season 2. At one point, Gauntlet of Thebes gave like 1100 HP for like 2000 gold if you stacked it up. So that was like clowned on for how OP it was on release. This is, if you get late game, it's going to be way more extreme than that ever was. But you got to get late game and you got to put in the work to stack it up. So yeah, definitely very important to keep in mind, even if you perfectly proc this and you manage to hit all the physical gods, all the magical gods, exactly every 10 seconds, specifically making sure you don't hit the wrong person once it's fully stacked up, then this would take, oh my God, this is math. Is it only 5 minutes? Okay, well, it'd be hard to do it in 5 minutes. I think you can hypothetically stack 6 minutes, 5 minutes. I think you can hypothetically stack it in 5 minutes. It would be very hard to do that because you need to hit a magic god with the passive up 15 times and a physical god with the passive up 15 times. Realistically, even if you do a good job, this should take like 10 or 20 minutes. And it would absolutely be plausible that you might go an entire 30-minute game and never stack it. It's something where you consistently have to be brawling or consistently managing to find ways to poke to stack it up. But if you can do that, it's going to be absolutely insane. And it's going to be a game changer. So moving on from that, we have something that is not OP. We have Cannoneer's Curse, which I think looked a little cheeks, but I got to remind myself what it is. You get 30 of each prot, you get 300 health, you get 20 HP 5. It's fairly cheap, like most of these items tend to be. Your next successful basic attack on an enemy lane minion causes it to explode, which insta-kills it and deals 50 plus 5 per level magic damage to enemies in a small area. Oh. Okay, this, I don't know. In the patch notes, they made it sound like this was lane minions or jungle minions. Like, it sounded like it was just minions. So this makes it look like you can maybe hit gods with it, which would make it better. But I'm not sure if you can or not. But it does damage in an area and provides 25 bonus gold to your nearest ally. The way that they set this up made it sound like when support is rotating to duo or mid, or I guess hypothetically solo, or maybe even the jungle, when support is splitting farm, if they put in the work to auto attack a minion around that farm, then they can add to the clear and they can give gold to their teammate. That's what it sounded like was basically the big deal. Maybe this actually can be used for PvP because it just says enemies. I don't think it can. I think that's kind of them accidentally leaving it out. All right, on to some balance changes. Archmage's Gem is getting better. It's going to go from 20% scaling to 30% scaling in max stacks, which is a good change because that item sucks. So Nuwa ult enjoyers rejoice. Eventually your late game gets a little better. Nuwa's still kind of bad though. Yeah, that's basically all there is to it. Gem of Focus is getting a huge buff, is getting the damage mitigation removed, but the damage increase and movement speed significantly increased. So you're going to go from 9% at max stacks to 15% to both your damage increase and your move speed, which is a really big deal. So normally, assuming you're not building this on a solo lane guardian, this would be hypothetically built on a mage and mid, which hasn't really been happening. It's been basically all pendulum. So if you want to build this instead now, it's way more viable where you can buff the shit out of your damage, buff the shit out of your move speed. It's going to actually feel impactful. You're not going to get the cooldown that you get out of Pendulum, but you should get enough of a boost from the other stats that it'll actually still be good and it'll be comparable. And then Pendulum's not getting changed from what I remember. Bluestone is getting a really big change. Don't be too scared by the 60 and don't be too excited by the 60. Whether you're against it or you're with it, it's getting a very big change so that it might feel better and it might not feel as good. So similar to the change that happened to Glad Shield, they are making it so Bluestone is going to do more damage up front and less abused by stacking. So enemies hit by your abilities will take 60 damage from the starter version. This is the one you can buy at level 1, 60 damage over 2 seconds. So 30 damage a second. However, this effect no longer stacks, it only refreshes, and subsequent hits on the same target do half the bonus damage for the next 3 seconds. One thing I want to bring up right now, I don't know if Hi-Rez thought this through because I haven't gotten to see how it actually works in practice. There is a chance that if you hit someone with an ability and you start applying this and you hit them with a new ability, it will inherently be like, oh, you got a subsequent hit and it will actively nerf the damage you are already doing. This is maybe possible that it's going to do that. So like if you get the first proc for 30 damage, it might nerf the second proc into 15 damage. Maybe, I don't know. Something to keep in mind, something to play around with. That's actually going to be a big deal if it does that. Assuming it doesn't, this is basically just going to make it a little more stable as an item where you're getting, for one thing, way more clear at level 1. And then you are also getting more reliable damage impact, both for killing minions and for killing gods, where even if you're landing fewer abilities, those abilities do more per hit. And because it's getting changed to the significantly higher damage amount total, You might even be trying to specifically sync up your abilities so that you're getting really good timing and getting better overall damage. So if you're somebody that has fewer damaging abilities, you might be trying to wait out the subsequent hit nerf and time your abilities just right so that you're getting the full 60 damage each time. Probably not going to happen often, probably normally going to be a dumb thing where you're overthinking it. Hypothetically could end up happening. But yeah, basically more upfront damage on Bluestone, less abusable damage on Bluestone. Overall should basically be a buff. Bluestone's pretty cheeks right now. I think it only does 20 damage over 2, if I remember right. Maybe it's 25. So making it do 60 even just on one hit is going to tend to feel good. So the fact that subsequent hits will also continue to increase and just do half, which would be 30, is still going to feel good. But yeah, you're not going to get the stacking damage anymore. So Bluestone Brooch looks a little crazy, but it has a similar effect where enemies hit by your damaging abilities will now take 200 plus 15% of their current health as physical damage over 2 seconds. Again, the subsequent hit half damage thing, again, no longer stacks, only refreshes. So upfront chunk is kind of what you wanted Sundering Axe to be whenever Sundering Axe got super hard nerfed, where you could maybe do, if we ignore prots, you could maybe be doing 500 damage to somebody with a single Bluestone proc. Of course, prots will probably make that like 250 or something like that, but hypothetically on a warrior, you could hit a single ability, and over those 2 seconds, the Bluestone alone would do 500 if somebody was max HP. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. But again, protections exist, but just something to keep in mind, it's going to be way more impactful up front. And Corrupted Bluestone's getting a similar thing. It's doing 250 over 5, but again, they're changing the way that it stacks. Okay, this is such a weird thing to read. The damage does not stack, it just refreshes. Of course, the actual attack speed stuff still stacks. Warding Sigil is getting reworked a little baby bit, so it's the same as before. Is it? Is it the same as before? Didn't it give mitigation? No, it didn't. It didn't. Okay. I was thinking the starter even gave mitigation. That wasn't true. So now you get 5 prots and healing for the stacks instead of just 5 prots. So getting a little bit of sustain out of the item. And then similar, Sigil of the Old Guard is now getting a 3% heal along with the mitigation that you got on the stacks from before. So basically just a buff to the item that was really not getting bought. Might make it good, probably still overall going to feel a little bit underwhelming, but makes it more viable for sure. Sundering Axe getting just a flat buff. It was really bad. It should get at least better. So now it is just inherently going to do 2% more of a health steal no matter what, which is nice. And that's the upgrade. Keep in mind, that's not just, that's not Warrior's Axe. Hero's Axe getting reworked. So this item in the Warrior's Axe upgrade tree is now Axe of Animosity. And believe it or not, they are taking from Animosity. So there's a little bit of a prot nerf to it, but now Animosity passive is moved over to this. And similarly, Animosity is now going to have the Hero's Axe passive, which makes way more sense. So this is maybe an item that you could see building on Osiris solo, Bologna solo, somebody that auto attacks a lot as you get into the late game. However, keep in mind, those are characters that absolutely love Death Toll. Even the Warrior's Axe at the moment is a very good starter item that does a lot of damage and is tanky and is just generally nice. Those are characters that get crazy sustain out of Death Toll. So if you want to try and do this, if you want to get a little cheesy, if you want to do some extra damage with your auto attacks late game, you're going to have this weird trade-off where Warrior's Axe is more of an ability-based item in the early game, and then Axe of Animosity is an auto attack item, whereas Death Toll is more of an auto attack item early game and then stays an auto attack item late game. So it might be a little more fitting, but you're not going to get bonus damage. You're going to get sustain with the Death's Embrace. So maybe feels worth it. I think it's still going to feel a little weird to buy this and probably tend to not be very good. But you can try it, and it makes the cheese more accessible, right? Oh, and keep in mind, this still does magic damage. All right. War Flag is getting a little bit changed. Read this if you care. I don't remember how it changes it because War Flag was really bad before. I think it is maybe hypothetically less bad. I think the big gist of this thing is it's less abusable in terms of the passive, where before you could do the kind of cheesy hitting people to gain health thing and to gain money thing. Now you're just getting extra money from minions. So if you love to cheese with War Flag, even though almost nobody did, then your cheese is gone. Get fucked. And if you didn't love to cheese, then it's going to be closer to whatever Sentinel's tier 1 is called, where it's a little bit better overall. Similar thing to War Banner, gaining 6 GP5 if you had the lowest money on the team in the late game, and then the rest of the passive I think is basically the same. Erendite buff. Erendite gets 10% more scaling. Not much to it. Don't really need to talk about it. A little bit of a buff. Aussie is getting a big change. This one I think could be really cool. It's actually interesting when they talked about this in the patch notes. They talked about this just being like a shift. And I think it's potentially a way bigger shift than they're really acknowledging. So 100 less gold, 25 more power, 5% more lifesteal, 5% less attack speed, removed the pen, made the passive easier to proc at 50% HP instead of just being 35% HP. So the way that this could impact the game, and in the Paladin's notes, they were talking about this being kind of a different way to build Aussie as a second item, which is already where it was bought before. To me, what stands out is this is a way to build Aussie over any item, and you can have an immediate damage spike in lane that feels insane at the downside of not getting a stacking item, which I think is really cool, even though seemingly, unless they just didn't want to talk about it, they didn't even realize, which I think is funny. So imagine instead of going Devos, which is also getting nerfed, so Devos is going to be, I think, 2400 compared to Aussie's new 2450. Imagine instead of going Devos, imagine going Aussie. And instead of having to stack Devos, you immediately get more power, you immediately get more lifesteal, you get attack speed that you do not get off of Devos, and you get a crazy passive, which I don't remember exactly what Aussie passive is in terms of stats. I think it's 30% bonus lifesteal every 10 or 15 seconds at this threshold, which is way easier to hit. 50% is so much easier to hit. So going into lane with this whenever you back is your first tier 3 could be crazy pressure in the lane. And in terms of the tier 2 slot, it should actually make it similar, because before you were already going to have power scaling off of either Devos or off of Trans. So even though you get way more power now, the pen would be more valuable when you already have that power. But before it was bad, even though some people did it, I'm sorry if this is one of you, before it was really bad to build Aussie as a first item, because for one thing, this is basically just a buff. But for another thing, pen is less valuable in the beginning of the game until you have power to scale it up. So even though it's flat pen, that 15 flat pen means way less when it's only coming with 25 power. That 25 power is not much. It's going to be really underwhelming. Aussie doesn't hit that hard right away. Whereas now you're getting an entire juicy 50 power and more lifesteal, a little bit of an attack speed nerf, and then you're getting a way easier to proc passive and a cheaper item. So hypothetically, if you want a big immediate pressure item on an auto attacker that's trying to sustain, this could get a little bit crazy. And even in the later stages of the game, keep in mind that it's actually going to feel more comparable to Devos now than it did before, because you're getting that big power chunk to set up yourself for crit and for more attack speed items. So even though flat pen in general is a good stat, Aussie was a weird one where you're not getting the same sort of power scaling that you want on a hunter, because you want to set up yourself for big crits or in general big autos, and that's just flat pen that kind of amplifies those autos. That amplification doesn't mean much if you haven't already amplified it with more power. Probably sounded a little confusing. Hopefully that made some sense. But basically, this is a potentially really big shift to an item that's been in the game for a long time. Atalanta's bow got a really big mix-up. It's a little bit cheaper, has more power, has more attack speed, has no lifesteal, has no crit, has 10% pen. It's probably bad. Atalanta's bow is already bad, so I don't think this matters much. When they talked about this in the patch notes, again, this is an item where I felt like it was a little bit weird what they were talking about doing with it. In general, this item is going to have, like, this is basically a nerf. It's kind of weird because I think it makes sense to change the stats on the item to something like this, but it's also kind of a strange change because if you just do the simple math, like, let's not even talk about the lifesteal. Let's just talk about crit chance. If you have 20% crit, like this had before, and you swap that out for 10% pen, that's just a nerf. Like, basically straight up, if we ignore spectral at the very least, it's a big nerf, because normally crit, 20% crit is going to be similar to having like 18% bonus damage on average on your autos. So if we're at least if we're focusing on the autos, we're missing out on a decent amount of damage right here, right? Because 10% pen is going to tend to be like a 7% boost. So we're missing out on quite a bit of damage, and they're removing the lifesteal. They are buffing it up a little bit in other ways. So while I think this is overall a good change for the item to make it feel a little more flexible to buy, and have more incentive to use that passive, it's also kind of a nerf to an item that already wasn't good. So it's a little bit weird. Huge change. I love this change, man. Bloodforge getting good. Bloodforge getting 150 gold off the cost, which makes it way more accessible, and getting 2% more move speed on an item that's already kind of slept on. I'm really hoping that I can get away with building Bloodforge more this season, partially off of this buff, which will be fun. We'll have to see if it feels like it's really worth it or not, but I like this change. I think Bloodforge is a really fun item, so making it more accessible I think is cool. Crusher is getting a shift, and believe it or not, I am not mad about this shift, even though I'm a Crusher enjoyer, okay? Even though I am a Crusher abuser. One thing to keep in mind immediately, because it's a very recent example, this hard nerfs Crusher on Bologna ADC, because it makes it more expensive to buy, and it basically It basically removes the cheese that we used on Bologna ADC, where you can abuse the flat damage procs a lot more. Now you don't have that. Way less of an early game item, way more of a late game item. The entire point of building it on Bologna ADC was for the early game. So even though this directly nerfs my favorite cheese, I think this is a cool change and I overall like it. So what they're doing, they're moving this over to the Titan's Bane tree. They're making it 300 gold more expensive. They're buffing its stats in return. So 55 power, 15 power boost total, extra 5% attack speed. The flat pen is getting turned into percent pen. So more of a tank shredding item. And then they took off the flat damage on its passive, and instead of the flat damage, which you would love early game, it gets 20% more scaling. However, it gets the subsequent damage reduction nerf that we've seen on all these other items. So if you hit somebody with a Crusher enhanced ability, you get 40% bonus scaling over time. So if we're thinking about something like Thorwall, I think Thorwall specifically is 40% scaling, if I remember right, the new buff to it that they gave it, which is a pretty decent impact on the game. Or like Erendite before its buff. Erendite was a 40% scaling proc right there. You just have that. Just from a single proc of Crusher. So that is a giant chunk. Normally, that is inherently going to make it way stronger than it was before. Because assuming you were actually building power, normally, I don't remember what the flat damage bit was before. I think it was like 20, right? I'm pretty sure something around there. Maybe I'm misremembering. Yeah, normally it's going to be very easy to build enough power to make it so that you're getting more out of the scaling. But it comes at this big downside of now you're getting 50% reduced damage on the subsequent hits. And similar to with Glad Shield, wait, not with Glad Shield. Similar to with Bluestone, I don't know how they program this. So you could troll yourself where landing abilities too fast might overall nerf your damage on the first proc. I'm not sure. We'll have to see once we get into game. So yeah, I think it's actually a cool change. I kind of like it. It makes it, the downside is it makes it more like Heartseeker. So these are kind of two of the same item, but they proc in a little bit different ways. So I think that's a little bit of a downside because Heartseeker kind of already does what this does, even more so now. But this also gives assassins a more late game disgusting melt people option, which I think is cool too. So yeah. And realistically, this was an item that was hard to build early game and have it be worth it before because Jotun's was too good. Or getting your trans scaling going was too good. So this brings it into a spot that makes more sense. It's just you get a little less of that flexibility with it is all. You definitely, like, you will never build this first item now. It's just stupid. So Dominance, this is a really good change. Dominance is getting its 10% pen removed. It's flat pen. Sorry, that's a weird way to put it. It's 10% normal pen, not the pen that applies to its autos, is what I mean. They're adding 15% attack speed and they're increasing the pen on the passive to 20%. So before you had 10% pen total and then an extra 15% on your autos. Now you just have 20% on your autos. So it's a little bit of a pen nerf even to those autos, but you get attack speed back, which makes it a little more flexible. And there's going to be a silver branch nerf as well to make this more accessible. So we should see a lot more dominance in the upcoming season, which is cool. Devo Gloves getting a little bit of a nerf. I think it needs more than this because Devo Gloves is really OP. 100 gold is not that big of a deal, but this is still a nerf that'll be impactful, especially because it was already hard to get one back where you get 1700 gold saved up. And now you have to try and get 1800 gold saved up if you want to do a one back recall. And that definitely stands out. I have had so many backs on my ADC games where I specifically get just 1700 and I back and I get Devos and I come back to lane. And making it that extra wave to get 1800 is actually going to be a more impactful nerf than it might look. But Devo Gloves is still crazy, so it probably still needs more. Emperor's Armor getting a cost increase, but also a passive buff. So it's going to be more effective at sieging, where you're reducing the attack speed of enemy structures, especially Phoenixes. But it's more expensive because this was kind of crazy as a stat stick and then also having a good passive. So now it's still going to have a really good passive and even better passive, but it's a little more expensive to build it, which I think is fine. Mailer Renewal getting a little bit of a just shift. So you're getting less prot, more health, more sustain, a little bit cheaper. Midgard getting a buff because they're removing Nemean and Witchblade. So they're just buffing Midgard because that's basically the one that you kind of fit into that slot. So a little bit tankier. Oni Hunter's Garb getting more mitigation from passive, little bit less health. Realistically, this is probably a little bit of a buff. It basically doesn't matter. It's probably just going to stay about the same. Rage gets a little crazy. Rage gets 5% more crit to start, okay? It's getting fewer stacks to evolve it, and you get 5 power per stack. So you're starting off with a little bit more crit to begin with on Rage. You need 1 fewer kill/assist to evolve Rage, or to finish stacking Rage. I mean, same thing. And then you are getting power with those stacks. So eventually this turns to a 55 power item instead of staying a 35 power item the whole time. And you also get more immediate crit. So basically just straight up big rage buff. Eventually you're getting 20 more total power. You get more immediate crit. You still get the same eventual crit. So rage stands out way more now. You might see this built on like actual meta hunter builds a little bit now because this is such a big buff. Whereas it was really like a Mercury item for like this entire last season. It's basically Merc builds it, or people that don't follow the meta build might build it for crit. But like this is something that's going to make it stand out more, especially with Shadow Steel getting removed. It'll make it stand out more. Tahuti getting a buff by making it cheaper, which is good. Silver Branch Bow is getting a little bit more power because it didn't have much, but they're reducing the pen by 10%, which is overall a pretty big nerf to it, which is good because this was the core pen item. Especially for me, who I don't like Executioner as much as the pros do. And Executioner tends to feel a little better in like SBL and high level competitive than in casuals and stuff. This was the go-to pen item for hunters because it gave you a variety of stats. It gave you a good passive that tends to be nice, and you just get 20% pen. So taking this down to 10% means that you got to search a little bit more for your pen, and also incentivizes you to go Dom, which is more of a true pen item where it's more focused on the pen, which is good as well. Spear the Magus is just getting a little bit of a shift where it's going to have 10% pen instead of 10 flat pen. This is basically a buff, I would say, because normally right now we're not in a meta where you're rushing Spear the Magus anyways, and percent pen's more of a late game stat. So this is basically a buff. Bobble is just straight up getting buffed. It's going to be cheaper. You're going to get more power. It's still probably not normally worth building. It still has the same passive where it nerfs your prots and stuff, but gets a bit of a buff. Oh boy, this is a big one. Oh, this is almost a 2-hour video. Oh my God. I'm just checking like, how long have I been recording? No wonder I'm tired, man. It's an hour and 40 minutes. If some of you actually watch this entire thing, respect. If you don't alt tab, if you stare at me, talk about patch notes and listen the whole time, oh my God, you have a will of iron. Class bonuses. This is actually a big thing to talk about, and it's going to shape the game a bit. When they announced this was going to be a thing, I was terrified. Seeing what they've done, I am actually pretty much okay with it. I think hypothetically, this is a thing that could be just better balanced. Hypothetically, they could just do a better job at balancing every individual god and every individual class and not need to do this. However, I think the way that they're implementing this is actually going to be pretty effective at shaping the game in a way that's actually good. So I don't really have a problem with it, even though I don't really like the kind of global, like the same way that we have like the global anti-heal nerf. This is a little bit like it, but less extreme. But I think it's okay. So the way this is going to work, if you are in a class, you get one of these buffs based on the class. So warriors gain 5% cooldown plus 0.25% per level, which means at level 20, it's 10. It starts at 5. Similar scaling on these other things. Assassins get flat pen at the same rate, 5 flat pen going to 10. Mages get power, starting at 20 power, going to 40 power. 40 power is not that good. 20 power level 1 is actually going to be pretty nice because mages really suck early game right now. So that 20 power is actually going to stand out quite a bit because it's like a full tier 1 item. Guardians are getting CCR, not CDR, but CCR, which is actually, I think, a pretty cool stat to give them. And this one scales a lot harder. I mean, I guess the mage power one looks like it scales hard because it goes up by 100%, but 20 power means like nothing late game. Going 10% CCR to 20% CCR makes it way easier to, in general, be a Guardian, but especially be a Guardian like Emir, one of those ones that can be a little bit more punished by getting crowd controlled and not having mobility to escape once they're out of that crowd control. You're just going to straight up take less. They're kind of getting a little tier passives added in. So I actually think that's actually a good change where it's not really going to be OP, but it's going to let them do their thing better, which should be nice. And then Hunters, this one might look terrifying, and it is a little bit, but Hunters are getting a nerf to go with it. So Hunters are getting one that is purely scaling. Their autos stay the same, but at level 20, they do 10% more damage, which is a third of a full death temper, which is a huge deal. However, if we skip ahead a tiny bit, every Hunter does 5 less damage on their autos now. So realistically, if we ignore this and we kind of turn it into this should be something along the lines of early game. This would be like Hunters do 90% damage, and then eventually Hunters still do close to 110. So their late game actually gets a little bit better, but their early game gets pretty hard nerfed. So I actually think this is a really good change for the most part because I think Hunters should be really gross late game, and I don't think it's going to make them too OP late game. Whereas early game, I think they do too much at the moment, and this is a way to tone that down and it's really going to get them out of the middle lane a decent amount. This is like by far more than even this mage buff. I think this is going to be getting hunters out of mid more, where they stand out too much early game. Straight up taking off 5 auto damage is a really big nerf, especially because they're getting a new purple buff that makes them stronger in duo, and they're not going to get that in mid, which is going to feel way worse too. So yeah, base magic prot changes, this isn't that big of a deal, but basically squishier rolls are going to have a little bit less magic prot in the early game, because this is kind of this old outdated stat they haven't really touched, where everybody just gets the same for some reason. Especially, I don't remember exactly what it is, but I swear squishy classes will start with like 17 fizz prot or something like that, and then somehow have 38 magic prot, and then everybody has that 38 magic prot. It makes no sense. So this just kind of balances the game a little bit better, basically. God, some stuff, some nerfs. I think we're mostly getting towards the end, but there's still got to be a little bit of stuff I'm forgetting about. Little nerf to Ishtar. We don't even really need to talk about this much. Her strike shot, which is her bomb autos, get a little bit weaker in the early game, still do the same once it's leveled. A little bit of a nerf to her ultimate, where it's getting less damage from getting multiple sword hits, not a big deal. Tiny baby nerf to Lance scaling on his 1, so he gets a little less out of his power, decreasing the base damage on his ult by a decent bit, 30 at all ranks. Thor getting less scaling on his ultimate arc damage, so the lightning hits that you're getting on people is going to have a decent amount of a scaling nerf, 5%, but it's 15% to begin with, so decent amount of a nerf, but Thor's been really good, so I think that's okay. Vulcan getting a big nerf, 10% of his scaling on his 1 is gone, an entire second of cooldown is added to his 1, because making it so that you can fire this ability when crippled was a pretty big buff, especially if you're trying to counter, not counter build, but like counter pick Vulcan. So in general, like with some of the item changes, he's gotten better, and with that buff, he had gotten better, and they might have even buffed his scaling to begin with too, I don't remember. So this kind of gets him a little bit more in line. He should still be good. Achilles getting a buff to the clear on his 1, only the clear. This will make him a little easier to play in lane. Buff to his 2. I don't think this one matters that much. I don't think you really, I don't remember spamming the 2 that much on Achilles. I don't think you care that much about that. Art can now place another trap. Probably not that big of a deal. A little bit more damage on her 3, a little bit more scaling on her 3. These are all pretty small. Bacchus getting a little love on his 1. I don't think it's going to be crazy, but at least it'll feel a little bit like there's a little more something to the ability. At base rank, he still gets 0 healing, but he now gets healing when he chugs based on the level of the ability, and it scales off of power. So if you are building him cheesy and damage, you're going to feel this a little bit more. If you are building him tank, you are going to feel it less. Kind of a weird way to balance it. You do also get power off of his passive, though, so you'll get a tiny little bit of this scaling, even if you build 0 power just from his passive. Flop got a big buff. It's now just going to be straight up 14-second cooldown instead of scaling to that through levels. So that's a pretty big deal. Baka Eat, they are giving this more of a consistent cooldown buff. That was something they added pretty recently, is where he resets his cooldowns by 1 second to 2 seconds, and now it's just straight up 2 seconds. So pretty decent buff right there. Baka ult getting more of a slow in the early game, 10% more slow to start. It's going to be the same once it's fully up there. This one, man, this one. Fenrir 2 is getting a buff, and I don't know why. Fenrir 2 was not OP enough. It was certainly not an ability where if you chucked it on basically any physical god in the game, it would be a little wild. They were like, you know what, let's make it a little more wild. Let's give it 25% attack speed, even at rank 1. So I am a Fenrir player. I love Fenrir. For a while, he was my favorite god. He's not anymore, but he was for a while. Fenrir 2 is OP. Fenrir 2, when he came out and for a long time, was an underwhelming ability where if you wanted to get some big potential boost to it, you had to use your passive, you had to use your 5 stacks, which wasn't worth it, and it was annoying to accidentally use those 5 stacks if you had to worry about it. And then they made it so that you didn't have to consume stacks, it wouldn't possibly do it, but they buffed it in return, similar to its fully enhanced version if you used all 5 stacks, which gave it whatever it is now, which I think at max rank right now, it's 80 power, 35% lifesteal, 6 seconds. I'm pretty sure. If not, it's really close. That is crazy. If you gave that to a hunter, that hunter would be broken as hell. It would not be like you can't question it. They would be broken as hell. If you gave it to somebody like Mercury would feel broken as hell. Because like even though Merc 2 is crazy, that would be crazy. So like you could take away Merc 1, give him no early game, and just give him that, and he would be like insane, absolute god tier character, right? So not only does Fenrir get that, he gets 25% attack speed on top of it, no matter what level it is. And that's going to make it so that if I feel like going into solo and we get a little cheesy and we do a Golden Blade start and we max the 2 for fun, this 2 is going to be that much better. Overall, it is not going to be a crazy change to Fenrir because attack speed's not that important of a stat for him, but it's actually going to be a deceptively big buff because it's going to make it faster to auto-cancel him in between his abilities, and it's going to give him more value out of delaying his 3 when he jumps on somebody, which is already something that a lot of the better Fenrir players will do as much as they can, where we will normally jump in with our stun. A lot of time we won't 2 first, a lot of time it'll be jump in, auto, 2, auto, and then continue to auto until you need to 3 so that you can min-max your damage and then stick to them with the 3. And now it's way faster to do that. So that's going to be a pretty noticeable buff. This one doesn't matter that much, a little bit more prot in your 3, not a big deal. Hachi gets a little baby buff, 10% more damage on his 2, 5% more scaling. Hell is getting a change to her dark stance 2, so it's percent reduction instead of flat reduction for the prot. Herc is getting a very confusing buff where Hi-Rez seems to have no clue why Herc is bad, and they are like, let's give him some random shit. So that random shit they decided to give him is 15 more damage rank 1, I guess 15 damage at all ranks on his 1, which already hits stupid hard, and 25% attack speed, yeah, they took from the Fenrir 2 for some reason, on his 3. His 3, which is all there to heal a shitload of damage. They're like, let's give it attack speed for some reason. We don't know why. They also buffed the cooldown, which is the bigger change. This is gonna, don't get me wrong, like this is a valuable buff for Herc, especially in lane. Getting this attack speed makes it way easier to smack, and this cooldown buff is actually a big deal. However, Herc's big problem as a character right now is he got absolutely screwed by the changes to DR. He will basically automatically fully DR somebody by comboing them. And of course, the whole thing Herc does as a character that makes him stand out is land the 2 and then 1 them. So the way that they should buff him, and this is even like, I'm not even going to question other options because it's just simple as hell, is as they've already done with a few other abilities recently, they could make it so his 1 does not get affected by DR, and if that would be OP, they can make it stun for less. They can make it just a flat, like smaller stun, not worry about it getting too OP, and as long as it's not affected by DR, Herc will be good. But instead they're making it so he still gets screwed by DR, but at least he does more damage. And that is not his problem. His problem is his stun is like irrelevant because he nerfs it himself by using his own CCs, which is dumb as hell. So that's all there is to it. I really hope they do that instead and they don't need to do this weird thing they had to do as 3. This was like probably the most confusing change in the entire patch to me. Hunbots gets a little bit of a buff on his 1, so it does more damage. This ability does some garbage damage. Now it's a little bit less garbage, and it's got a better scaling, or not a better scaling, a better slow at level 1. Still scaling up to the eventual final really big slow. So a little bit of a buff to Hunbots. Arthur is getting nerfed pretty hard this patch by the changes to Bluestone and the changes to Glad Shield. So in exchange for that, they're trying to buff him up a little bit. I have a pretty strong feeling that with the nerfs hitting him as hard as they should, because he is by far the biggest Bluestone Glad Shield enjoyer there is, these buffs should not be big enough to make up for it at all, and he should overall get pretty hard nerfed this patch. So yeah, we'll probably be seeing more Arthur buffs in the future. I don't personally care. I kind of enjoy Arthur. I think he's fine. To me, it's okay that, that he's going to get hard nerfed this patch. I'm not really worried about it. They can figure it out over time. Nene Cap is getting a buff, 2-second cooldown reduction, which is pretty big. And then also getting a stronger slow eventually, scaling up to 30% as you level it. So that could be nice. Kumba's getting some crazy buffs. This passive buff is probably deceptively good for one thing. It's going from a 3-minute cooldown to a 2-minute cooldown on his passive, which will make him way more annoying to deal with in terms of finishing him off. But the bigger buff, as big as that actually might be, this buff is crazy. You guys remember when they buffed CERN and gave him a cripple on his 2 instead of just a root on his 2, and then all of a sudden CERN became a meta ADC? That is what they are doing to Groggy Strike. It is getting a cripple in addition to the root that is going to last the duration of the root. I don't remember how long the root lasts, but I think it's fairly long. And that is going to make it way harder to play against Kumba. He is going to be way more of a crowd control menace, and he might actually become good again. I don't think he will feel broken, but I think it might actually, just this alone, probably will make him a good support. I could be wrong. So yeah, Morgan getting a little extra scaling on her 3, which will be decent. Getting some extra scaling on the consume mark part of her passive, or not her passive, of her ultimate. So when you build up all those marks on somebody and consume them, and it does almost nothing, now it'll do quite a bit more. Her ultimate itself, everything else, all the 3 hits will still do the same damage as they did before. Nike getting a little bit of a buff, getting 15 more damage on her 3 at all ranks, getting a 10%, or not 10%, 10-second cooldown reduction on her ultimate. Olerin getting a deceptively big buff, maybe not even deceptive, but his crits really don't do that much in current Smite. They're going to go up by 0.2 times in damage, in the upcoming patch. And that is actually pretty big because these crits did not hit very hard. Now they will actually be hitting significantly closer to regular physical crits. However, keep in mind you are playing Olorin. Mages do not have crit items. He only builds crit through his passive, which means he's not going to be able to abuse this as hard as like an ADC could if their crit got amplified, like a hunter, I mean, if their crit got amplified. But this is a pretty big Olorin buff, which sucks because Olorin's cringe as hell, man. His ultimate's so annoying. Surtr getting a really big buff. Her madness right now scales from 1 second, 1.4 seconds as you level it, which is the CC on the 2, the sort of like taunt slash like, what exactly is it? Taunt slash silence, I guess is what madness basically is. Now it just straight up does 1.4. So early game where Surtr is suffering a little bit at the moment, she's going to be significantly stronger. This is a really big buff to her CC as she gets past like, everything up to like level 9 is basically going to get a pretty big CC buff. And then her ambush took 2 seconds off the cooldown on that. Hi-Rez, why did you do that? As if Surtr was not mobile enough and annoying as hell to catch with her 3 and her 1, she is now even more mobile because she has even lower cooldown on her 3. Realistically, this is probably a good change because ambush is by far her worst ability and it's not close, but it's also a really annoying ability. So that might be real obnoxious. Hi-Rez found out that Scotty is my least favorite character, and some people that are watching / listening to this now just found out as well. And they were like, you know what? Let's fuck with him a little bit. So Scotty is getting a big buff in a variety of ways. So Calder now regens significantly faster. Before he got 1 HP every 5 seconds, that would be going from 0 to full HP in 25 seconds. Now it's every 4, which means it's only 20 seconds to fully heal Calder, which is a pretty big buff to how often you can use him. Piercing Cold getting a flat 2-second cooldown reduction, which is a really big buff for her poke and her just reliable damage as well, her wave clear and her poke. And I guess maybe even aside from poke, just her fighting, her Piercing Cold's a lot of her damage, especially because half her damage is Calder. That's like a pretty big chunk of the rest of the damage is from Piercing Cold. Winter's Grasp is getting a little bit of a rework. So they're moving damage away from overall tick damage as Calder sticks to you in her ultimate, or Winter's Grasp is the ultimate. They're giving it upfront damage and then nerfing the tick damage. So overall, it is still going to do even more damage than it did before. But more importantly than that, it is going to do damage up front where it didn't do much before. So it's doing an initial hit that gets up to 205 base plus 25% off of this, but then basically having the tick damage at the same time. So basically, it's just an ult buff, and a pretty significant ult buff. Scotty will actually probably become a little bit popular for at least a bit when the season comes out, which I'll hate, but maybe I won't have to ADC and it won't be that big of a deal. Sobek is getting an actually kind of significant buff, not on his 3, which is getting a 10 flat buff, but getting a big slow buff to his ultimate. Right now, his ult slows for 25% at all ranks, and they're changing it to 30 up to 40% from rank 1 to 5. So late game Sobek is going to slow for almost twice as much in his ultimate. He's also going to be a bit tankier than before in his ultimate, which is a pretty big deal. His ult still should suck, but it should suck less. Because right now the issue with Sobek ult is it's hard to even get the damage off because people can just get out. Takes forever to cancel it early. Doesn't CC other than the slow. The slow isn't that good. He has all those downsides to it. Making the slow way better is going to make it a more impactful ability and not feel like the worst ult in Smite. Now it'll probably be like the 5th worst ult in Smite, something like that, where it should feel at least a decent amount better and still just overall be bad, which is okay because there can be bad ults. So that's still it's a pretty big buff for Sobek. Vamana getting a big change to his ultimate, which I think is very cool. So Vamana ult no longer heals you. I'm barely going to talk about this. The reason, and they even talked about this in the patch notes, the reason Vamana ult is so bad right now is because Ankh is so OP. If you have healing, like actual ability healing, whether it's from a teammate or yourself, and Ankh hits you when it's upgraded, I'm trying to remember, does tier 1, tier 2 Ankh, I think, gives you a little bit of a nerf, but the big thing is how good Drowned Ankh is once it's upgraded. But if you heal, not only do you really easily anti-heal Vamana so he does not even heal from this ability, but you make it so that Drowned Ankh will make him take 20% more damage. So it's like you dared to ult on Vamana, you now take more damage for ulting on Vamana. Probably the most noticeable ability in all of Smite. If there's one thing where Drowned Ankh looks really OP, which it's really good in general, but like if there's one thing that makes it look OP, it is Vamana ult. It just absolutely farms him. So they saw this instead of nerfing Drowned Ankh, which again, I have issues with anti-heal right now, but we don't need to go back into that. I already talked about it. Instead of nerfing Drowned Ankh, they are helping Vamana out by taking away the healing and instead giving him a big chunk of lifesteal and buffing his shield. So he's now going to have 30% lifesteal in the ult. He is not going to heal in the ult from the actual ability itself. Obviously, he can still receive healing. And he gets double the shield now. So before he got 1% of his HP every 0.2, now it's 2% every 0.2. Of course, stuff like Ankh and Sunder and other abilities that nerf shields can still nerf his shield by using those. But he's getting a physical lifesteal, which does not get the damage increase from Ankh. It'll still get nerfed by Ankh. He'll still get less lifesteal by getting anti-healed, but at least he's not taking more damage for existing because Ankh got popped. Unless somebody heals him, and then he yells at whoever healed him. Yeah, and then this should also potentially, if he's using this aggressively, and if he's building like a cultured individual that maybe likes to go crit and hasten on his Vamana and build 0 defense, then he's maybe even healing more than he did before. It's going to vary on the context, and he's going to need to be aggressive, and he doesn't just get the healing by just popping the big baby. He's going to have to actually fight, either hit minions, hit gods, whatever, and get that lifesteal back. I don't know for sure. I believe with his ultimate autos, because this is normally true for auto attacks like this where they kind of turn into cones, but they aren't normally any sort of AoE auto. I believe he will get the full lifesteal of 30% per minion/god hit, and it will not get nerfed from hitting multiple. I could be wrong. Normally abilities like this, if they're not specifically, stuff like Iza autos have to get nerfed in advance because it'd be dumb as hell otherwise. Stuff like this, you normally keep the full lifesteal bonus. So if you ult a level 5 on Vamana in a minion wave and you brawl, you will probably get crazy healing off the lifesteal from hitting minions and hitting a god. And then Xbalanque gets a big buff to his ultimate, literally exactly what I've talked about. I think the past few Xbalanque videos where I've been like, I would love it if they gave his ult attack speed so it felt less shit. They gave his ult attack speed and they gave it a ton. What is funny is now that I think of it, I think the exact numbers that I mentioned whenever I talked about this last, I think this is the exact numbers. So I'm excited for this. I think it's a good change for Shiba, where he's getting 20% to 60% attack speed in his ultimate, which lasts a few seconds. It doesn't last a crazy amount of time, but this is a nice buff for his DPS, and it makes the ability feel a lot better and like less of just a generally support your team ability. Changes to this. I have no clue what any of these are. Let's give it a little peek, see if we can tell much. What? Minions are faster? Okay, these might be hard to tell. It says 2% move speed boost every 3 minutes to lane minions. Like, is that just worded weird? Because that implies that like minions get fast as hell if you get 50 minutes in the game. Like, I don't think that's true. Like, that makes it sound like minions are gonna be zooming around the map. I don't think it's worded the way that it looks right now. Let's see. Anything else? I can't tell. Might not really be too much to look at here. Yeah, it's not looking like anything particularly important. I think we'll just move on. I think we'll just move on. You guys can look if you personally care. And that does it for the patch notes. We just got the voice actors down here for some of the skins. Oh, so this has been a 2-hour video. Even though I wanted to get through it relatively quick, I don't know if I didn't do a good job or if the patch was just that big. 2-hour video has got to be by far the biggest patch notes video I've done, I believe, which makes sense because it's season 10 and season 10 is a huge season. We had a god to get through. We have a map to talk about. We have a bunch of changes to the map. We have a bunch of item balance. This is by far the biggest item rework they've done that I can remember ever. Really big season. Overall, final ending notes. I'm going to make it quick. I'm really excited about this season. They're changing the map a lot. I think the map changes look good. They're doing some spicy things in the jungle, which I think will be fun. The item balance, I think, is fairly questionable. The great thing about item balance is it's easy to mess with them. If it seems like some of these changes were terrible ideas with the items, I am hoping that Hi-Rez will be open to just undoing them or shifting them so that some of the more extreme items, a lot of them are probably just fine and they might just need like mild stat nerfs, and that's easy to do. Some of the ones, whatever the item is, where you get a punch for crazy true damage, whatever the item is, not even whatever the item, Divine, where they're adding the chain lightning, those are 2 items that I specifically remember right now where it's like, those are probably going to need to be touched up, especially the Divine chain lightning is probably going to feel really strong. So I'm hoping Hi-Rez will be open to changing that, because while I think some of the new items are potentially cool and some of the reworks are potentially fine, that's something where those could just feel ridiculous and just way too strong item passives. Other than that, yeah, map looks very exciting. God changes, not really much to talk about. God nerfs and buffs are pretty minor. They're not going crazy. In general, Smite feels pretty balanced at the moment, and I think Hi-Rez just knows that, and they don't want to, they're already adding a bunch of items. They don't really need to bother with a bunch of God changes, so they're just doing some mild stuff that makes sense, trying to bring up the people that feel bad and nerf the people that feel good. Trying to think, other than that, Shards, I'm really excited for the upcoming shards. I think that'll be really fun to play around. I think, I don't know, probably not too much to talk about. I'm overall really excited for the patch. Like there are a few things that I think are questionable. Compared to a normal big patch, there is less that I feel like is questionable than I normally do. And way more changes too, which means overall it's feeling way better. So I'm excited. I think it'll be really fun. Looking forward to PTS. Might not be able to hop on PTS immediately because even if it's up now, it's been 2 hours. Maybe it is up. I need to sleep. I have talked way too much for 2 straight hours, and I am worn out, man. Oh my god. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you all in the next one.